Mega Man X is one of my favorite game series. They're energetic action platformers that I can always go to when I want to have some comfortable fun. Starting today is a project I've had in my head for years now. I want to look back at the series and why these games are so important to me. So welcome to the Mega Man X Retrospective, or the Mega Man Extrospective if we're trying to be a little crazy. We're going to kick it off with the first game in the series and the first one I played, the original Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo. I first got introduced to the Mega Man series as a whole from YouTube videos talking about how good Mega Man 2 was. I even played a demo of that game on my mom's iPhone in 2009. Then I watched the YouTuber Clement J642 play the other games in the series, and I tried Mega Man 10 on WiiWare when that came out. A year later in 2011, I saw the original Mega Man X collection on GameCube at a GameStop, and I bought it. And the first Mega Man X was the game that really got me into the series. I liked Mega Man 10, but X was so addicting. I played it all the time in middle school. As I got older, I delved more into the series with the PlayStation X games, and I actually haven't played this one as much. So I'm really interested in what my thoughts will be as a 24-year-old. Oh, and I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. It would really help me grow and continue to make more content like this. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the video. Mega Man X is a sequel series to the original Mega Man games. Set 100 years after them in 21XX, the protagonist X is an advanced robot designed by Dr. Light from the classic series. Unlike other robots, he possesses free will, which gives him great potential, but is also a great danger if he decides to rebel against humanity. 30 years in stasis are required to ensure X is not a threat, but sadly Dr. Light is very old at this point and won't live long enough to see his creation out into the world. X is discovered and released by a man named Dr. Kane, who uses X's design to create other robots of free will called Reploids. However, some Reploids rebel against humanity as Dr. Light feared. These Reploids are labeled Mavericks, and other Reploids are tasked with stopping them. These Reploids are known as Maverick Hunters, and X is one of them. But he isn't as strong as others on his team, like his friend Zero, or the leader of the Maverick Hunters, Sigma. Fun fact, Zero was originally supposed to be the main character in the series, but he was changed to a side character, and X was created to more closely resemble classic Mega Man. One day, Sigma himself goes Maverick, and it's up to X to stop him and his army from destroying humanity. However, X is defeated by the Maverick Vial in the intro level and is only saved when Zero shows up. Zero tells him he's not at his full potential yet and he needs to get stronger. X accomplishes this by taking down Mavericks working for Sigma and upgrading himself along the way. X and Zero regroup in Sigma's fortress, where Vial captures Zero and X. But Zero is able to break free, and he sacrifices himself before X finally defeats Vial. The loss of Zero is a real shame because he'd be a really fun character to play as, but Zero will never, ever be seen again. X then defeats Sigma and has a little existential crisis where he wonders when he'll be able to stop fighting. 2004, my friend. It all ends in 2004. Sigma then vows to return in a new body, like he's Rick Sanchez or something, and the game ends. The story is much more involved than previous Mega Man games. This was one of the goals during development. It still isn't deep or anything, but it certainly is more interesting, and for a 2-hour-long Super Nintendo game, it does a very good job. What stands out to me is how well the game puts you in X's shoes. You see, stories in video games are very different in that the player is actively involved, as opposed to a movie or a book. You are X when you play the game. It's kind of like a second-person point of view. So when Vial beats you, you feel like you're not strong enough. But when you're strong enough to beat Vial and Sigma, you do feel growth and a sense of accomplishment in what you've done as X. And that's what I like about the story. I will also say that I really like the designs for the characters in these games. Well, except for Vial, because he's literally just Boba Fett but purple. The production values are also a step up. Since we're on the Super Nintendo, the graphics are much more detailed than the NES Mega Man games, and it looks very good for the time. Especially the backgrounds. And then there's the music. Oh man, the music in the classic series was good. But the soundtracks in the X series are just so great, and this game is one of the best. The whole soundtrack is just amazing. I think Storm Eagle's theme is my personal favorite, but it's all such high quality. Now we get to the gameplay. At first it seems pretty identical to the original Mega Man games. You can still jump, shoot, and charge your buster, but there's quite a few differences. Like there's no slide, and you can jump on walls now. X can also upgrade himself a lot. He can get 8 heart tanks that permanently increase his health, 4 sub-tanks that refill his health during fights, which can be replenished by collecting health energy from defeated enemies, and 4 armor parts, containing upgrades Light left behind for X and capsules. The armor parts were actually inspired by RPGs at the time, where characters are constantly improving throughout the game. They are extremely useful. The body parts cut the damage you take in half, the buster parts give you the ability to charge up special weapons, and gives the X-Buster another charged attack. The head parts let you break certain blocks with your head. Okay, that one's kinda lame. And the most important one, the foot parts let you dash. The dash greatly increases your ground speed, and by combining it with the jump, you can dash jump to fly through the air, which you use all the time in this game. This upgrade is so important, it has its own button, which I always set to the L trigger. In terms of structure, there's an intro level, and once you beat that, there are 8 Maverick stages you can go to in any order you want. And you've guessed it, you fight a Maverick at the end of the stage. All the upgrades are in these Maverick stages, with each one containing a heart tank, and some stages having sub-tanks and light capsules. The Mavericks each give you a special weapon when you defeat them, and every Maverick is weak to another's special weapon, creating a weakness chain. For example, Boomer Kowanger is weak to Launch Octopus's weapon, and Stink Chameleon is weak to Boomer Kowanger's weapon. Following the chain all the way leads you to Armored Armadillo, whose weapon beats Launch Octopus. After you beat the Maverick stages, Sigma's Fortress opens up, and these are the final levels, with the boss rush sprinkled in there. By the way, in the upcoming X reviews, I'm going to make this structure section much shorter. But this is the first X game, so I need to fully explain it here. The gameplay is really fun in this game. Adding the dash makes the game so much more fast-paced than the classic Mega Man games. And I already think the basic shooting and jumping was fun there, so this just enhances that. There's even a mechanic in this game where if you shoot a pellet and dash at the same time, the shot does double the damage. Wall jumping is also a cool addition, and it makes boss fights more interesting since you're really using the full space of the arena. It also allows for more vertical platforming, and the level design is fantastic. Every stage is fun to jump around in while duking it out with enemies. They do a good job of mixing it up without feeling gimmicky. Like some stages are just standard platforming, such as Storm Eagle, but a stage like Stink Chameleon has a ride armor, which is a vehicle X can pilot that has its own health bar, and fights enemies by punching them in the face. And with all the collectibles in this game, you're really encouraged to explore everything in the stages to power up X. And upgrading X feels satisfying because everything you get is so useful. For example, the sub-tank's ability to heal you, and the body part that cuts damage in half, both make fighting bosses much easier. The special weapons are also helpful. Storm Eagle's weapon just destroys most enemies, has a massive hitbox, and lingers for a few seconds. Or Stink Chameleon's weapon when fully charged makes you invincible for a bit, and let me fly through half of Boomer Kowanger's stage. I think all the special weapons are useful in this game, which is something I definitely can't say in future X games, but I digress. Every few minutes in this game you're getting stronger with the heart tank here and a special weapon there. It's very fast paced because there's always something going on. Because you can fight the 8 Mavericks in any order you choose, there are many different ways of playing these games, and that's a big part of what makes them so replayable to me. If you watched my previous video on the X8 16-bit demake, which you totally should if you haven't by the way, it's a great video, you'll know I like coming up with my own specific routes through the X games. My routing is all about getting the best upgrades as soon as possible, getting every item, and minimizing backtracking. This usually involves not following the weakness chain all the way, but I don't really bother with that anyway because I actually think it makes the game less fun. A critique I have with this game and the whole X series is using a Maverick's weakness on them traps them into one very simple pattern that essentially nullifies them. The community calls this Spark Mandrill syndrome, where the boss is metaphorically, and literally, frozen by his weakness, making him a total joke. Like he's not even moving half the time, come on. For most of these games, I usually fight the Maverick bosses with just the X-Buster, because what's the point of a boss fight if you're not being challenged in some way? It makes the game much more fun in my opinion. Everyone who plays this game starts with Chill Penguin first, because his stage gives you the dash, which is not only the best upgrade in the series, but is also the only one you're required to get. It really is salient to pick this up ASAP, because the game is heavily designed around it. So many collectibles require dash jumping to get, and it just makes the game move along much faster. After Chill Penguin, I do Storm Eagle to grab the first heart and sub-tanks. By the way, I really like sub-tanks. It's nice how you always have them, unlike energy tanks in the classic series. This stage also gives you the head parts to break blocks, which you'll need in the next level. Storm Eagle is kinda infamous for being a joke, and I was honestly surprised at how free he was. He didn't even directly attack me most of the fight. Flame Mammoth is up next, and his stage gives you the Buster upgrade, which will be very useful in a bit. For now, I'll say that I've never been a big fan of the last stage of the X-Buster charge it gives you in this game, because it's weaker on bosses than the non-upgraded version, which is very strange. Flame Mammoth is surprisingly easy without his weakness. Fun fact, you can chop off his trunk with Boomer Quanger's weapon. Wait, is that mutilation? So far my order has been pretty standard, but things change with Sting Chameleon up next. I chose him because I know the damage reduction part in his stage will be really helpful to have early along with his special weapon. This boss fight is actually pretty tough without his weakness, since he's invincible a lot of the time. I barely beat it, but to be fair, I was too lazy to grind for sub-tank ammo beforehand. Beating Sting Chameleon gives you his weapon that, as aforementioned, makes you temporarily invincible. Having access that early is pretty neat, and with 4 stages done, we have all 4 armor upgrades already. I then took on Launch Octopus, who is actually pretty tough, since he's another guy who loves being invincible, and he shoots at enemies that block my shots at him. I will say, beating Sting Chameleon and Launch Octopus both felt really satisfying because of how tough they were. I then backtracked through Chill Penguin stage to get a heart tank I needed Flame Mammoth's weapon for, and Sting Chameleon stage for another heart tank. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is beating certain Mavericks affects other Maverick stages. For example, beating Storm Eagle before Spark Mandrill crashes his plane into the stage and causes it to occasionally black out. Some of these changes let you grab some upgrades. Like in Sting Chameleon stage, there's a heart tank that's inaccessible until Launch Octopus is beaten, which floods the cave and lets you dash jump to get it. This is an interesting idea that I think is cool, but I do get why other games in the series don't do it, because it can lead to more backtracking for first time players. Anyway, next up I did Armored Armadillo, who I definitely should have done after Flame Mammoth, because his stage has the 3rd sub-tank, and is the best in the game for grinding lives and health energy. Seriously, it's so fast here, and the grind spot is right at the start. Man, this game is so well designed. The reason I did this stage late is because I was scared of the boss. He can actually absorb the Charged X-Buster shot, so I had to fight him with pellets, and he can be a little tough. But with 3 sub-tanks, he definitely would have been fine. You can also do Launch Octopus before Sting Chameleon to save yourself a backtrack, but I felt like doing him early, and I needed footage of a before and after stage change. Last up I did Boomer Quanger and Spark Mandrill, both of which went down easy with the X-Buster because of how strong my nearly maxed out X is at this point. I did Mandrill after Quanger because Quanger's weapon gets you the last sub-tank. And that's my order through the game. If you do Launch Octopus before Chameleon, the only backtrack you'll need is in Chill Penguin stage, which everyone has to do anyway. Okay, technically there is another backtrack. Once you have every collectible in the game, including all special weapons, take this minecart and Armored Armadillo stage to this ledge with full HP. Then jump into the pit to repeat the sequence in the exact same way 3 more times. On the 4th time, a Dr. Light capsule will be there, where he gives you the Hadouken from Street Fighter. It's so funny to me how Light is dressed up like Ryu here, by the way. The Hadouken is pretty good in this game. It kills everything in one hit, including bosses with full HP if you do the input from Street Fighter. I kinda suck at it, but I think it's a really cool feature. Getting it is super convoluted though, since it's the kind of nonsense you'd only know about from Nintendo Power, but it's a fun secret that helps with the tedious boss rush in the final stages. I don't like boss rushes in Mega Man games, because they're just the same fights you already did, but easier because you're always stronger at the end of the game. They're padding and I use the weaknesses on them here to get a move on. The bosses are pretty fast in this game at least, especially with the Hadouken. Sigma's the final boss and he has 3 phases. The first 2 are pretty easy, but the real demon is the last phase. Sigma is constantly throwing out attacks with big hitboxes, and you can only fight him by jumping on his moving hands that also attack you. You just need to get a rhythm for when lightning shoots out of his hands, but I was pretty rusty at that part this playthrough, until the end of the fight. If you die, there are some worm enemies to fight who can refill your sub-tanks, but it takes too long for me if you used all 4 against Sigma. So what I did instead is I got my lives down to 0 in Storm Eagle stage, and then fought Sigma so if I lost, I could game over to the stage select screen and refill my sub-tanks in Armored Armadillo stage. This didn't end up happening this playthrough because I'm too clean with it, but I just wanted to share that because I've lost to him a lot in my life, and I do not enjoy grinding against those worms. But anyway, Sigma goes down, and that's curtains for the original Mega Man X. I have to say, this game is even better than I remembered it. The music's great, the story's well told, collecting upgrades is fun, there's always something going on, the game design is fantastic, it's a good level of difficulty, it's fast paced, it's just amazing. I had some minor complaints with it, but I love this game. I remember why I played it so much as a kid, and I definitely plan on playing it more frequently now. It's one of the best games in the series, potentially even the best, and one of the best games ever made. 30 years later, and it still holds up extremely well. Welcome back to the Mega Man X retrospective. Today we're going to be looking at the first two sequels to the original Mega Man X, Mega Man X2 and X3. X2 is a direct sequel to one of the best games ever made. Those are very big shoes for any game to fill. It was released just 1 year after its predecessor in 1994 on the Super Nintendo, and has never managed to achieve the same legacy. But it's still considered a great game. I first played it on the X Collection on the GameCube in 2012. Even though I played X1 all the time back then, it actually took me like a full year to play this game, for whatever reason. And I enjoyed it, but it didn't really stick out to me, so I didn't revisit it much. However, when I was 17 and really got into the rest of the series, I came back to X2 and loved it. I actually thought it was better than X1, and it used to be my second favorite game in the series. But I haven't played it much since then, so what are my thoughts now? The plot is Sigma's Mavericks are still causing havoc even after his death. X and the other Maverick Hunter, oh no. X invades an old Reploid factory to finally stop the resistance. But in the shadows, a group of Mavericks called the X Hunters have teamed up to beat him by sending their followers after him, while they rebuild his dead friend Zero in the hopes of using him against X. Pretty soon, they contact X to fight them directly in the hopes of getting Zero's parts back. After beating them, X finds out they were working for a returning Sigma and goes to confront him. X discovers that Sigma's either rebuilt Zero or has built a fake Zero. Either way, X gets Zero back and defeats Sigma again. Sigma hints that Zero was supposed to be a Maverick and was the last of the Doctor's creations. What Doctor? Wait, oh my god. It all makes sense now. X was created by Dr. Light, so that must mean Zero. Zero was created by Dr. Mario! Well done, Capcom. X wonders what he'll have to sacrifice to achieve Dr. Light's dream of peace between Reploids and humans, and the game ends. There's not much to say about this story. Obviously it's a platformer from 1994, but X1's plot was definitely more impactful since it was about X improving throughout the game. He still gets stronger in this game, but it's not really part of the story since everyone knows how capable X is from the start. There are some minor things I like, such as seeing Dr. Kane, because we almost never see humans in this series, or the Japanese version hinting that Surges is a robotic copy of Dr. Wily, the villain from the classic series. From a graphical standpoint, X2 is a clear improvement over its predecessor. The backgrounds are more detailed, and there are a lot more visual effects. Like in Wire Sponge's stage, with the sunny weather and rain, or the multiple uses of the CX4 chip. This chip lets NES games render 3D polygons, and it definitely does look impressive for the time. Albeit a little out of place against everything else on the screen being 2D. You can tell the developers were proud of this chip, because the title screen and the final boss both use it. When I think about this game, I always remember that it's the X game with all the wireframes. The soundtrack is also very good. Not as good as X1 in my opinion, but there are some real bangers here. By far my favorite song in the game is the theme for X Hunter Stage 1 and 2. It's phenomenal. The gameplay is very similar to X1. You can still jump, shoot, charge your buster, and wall jump. Except this time the dash is available at the start, which is really nice, and it's a feature every following X game has too. The ride armor from X1 returns, except it's a bit different in that I can hover now. Another vehicle has also been added. The Ride Chaser, which is a bike you can ride on while dashing and shooting at enemies in Overdrive Ostrich's level. Other than that, I would say the main changes have been to X's abilities. You can still get 4 Dr. Light armor parts that are a bit different from before. The foot parts now give you the air dash, which allows you to dash during a regular jump, which is a very helpful upgrade that feels like a natural progression from the dash in X1. The buster part is amazing in this game. It once again lets you charge up special weapons, but more importantly, it powers up the full charge shot, so you can fire 2 of them in a row. As a trade-off, you can't move until X is done firing, but man, this is so satisfying to hit bosses with. It does very good damage and is a vast improvement over the upgrade in X1 that was usually better if you didn't fully charge it. The body parts once again have the damage you take, which is great, and it also gives you a screen nuke attack that I never really use. And then the head parts find secret pathways, which is also not very practical in my experience. But still, I love the armor upgrades in this game. The second armor is easily one of the best in the series. The special weapons are good in this game too. At first I thought they were kinda bad, but it's more so that they're a bit slower and not as practical as in X1. But they definitely have their uses. like Overdrive Ostrich's weapon that shoots vertically up when fully charged, and killed this enemy that was trying to crush me. Crystal Snail's weapon that freezes enemies and lets you platform off them, or my personal favorite, Bubble Crab's weapon, that does good damage and one-shots enemies in this grind spot. And like X1, they help a lot in getting certain other upgrades. The structure of this game is almost the same as X1. Once again, there's an intro stage, 8 Mavericks to fight in any order you want, whose special weapons beat each other in a weakness chain, heart tanks, sub-tanks, and armor parts to collect, and some final levels. But when you're exploring the stages, you may find doors that you can't open, but are clearly important. And that's where we get to the main gimmick of the game, the X-Hunters. After you beat 2 Mavericks, the 3 X-Hunters make their presence known, and will show up in some of the Maverick stages to fight X behind these doors. Beating each of them gives you a part of Zero. It's kind of morbid that the villains are just walking around with Zero's body parts in this game, isn't it? If you beat all of them before the 8 Mavericks are defeated, the final boss has one less phase, because Zero has been rebuilt by you, and insta-kills the fake Zero. I think this is a good feature, especially because it encourages exploration, and even adds some strategy to the game, and when you want to fight the X-Hunters. If you game over or re-enter a stage you've already beaten and exit out of it, the X-Hunters will be shuffled around to new locations. I did this before Overdrive Ostrich's level, because I did not want to fight Surges and the Maverick in one go with only one sub-tank. Every game after X1 tries to innovate the formula, for better or worse, and I think this is one of the best attempts at that. The stages in this game are solid. They're fun to explore and have some great platforming. Like in Flamestag's level, where you have to wall jump fast to beat the rising lava, or keeping the ride chaser from blowing up in Overdrive Ostrich's level to get the heart tank. And like X1, it feels rewarding to upgrade X in these places. So far this game sounds great and like a real improvement on X1. So you may be asking, do I still think this game is superior? And the answer is no. This game is solid, but I realize I have some minor issues with it during my playthrough. Like I praised the X-Hunters mechanic before, but if you miss one of them in the level they're in, you will never see that specific hunter again, and you won't be able to reunite Zero as a result. The game does not tell you this. It does unlock you have a good ending or anything, but that's not cool. And as good as the levels are, they're just not as fun as the ones in X1 in my opinion. I think part of it might be the upgraded charge shot stopping your momentum when you fire it, which slows down the fast pacing just enough that you feel it. I also think the end bosses are a bit too non-interactive or easy in this game. Like I'm barely moving, and so all of them are pushovers when X has the body armor and 4 sub-tanks, which are overkill in this game in my opinion. I think the problem is the bosses don't move around enough. I forgot to mention this in my X1 review, that you cannot use a password or save to return to a specific final level. If you make it to Sigma, and shut off the game to come back to it later, you gotta go through the whole fortress and refill your sub-tanks all over again. X2 has the same problem, which I don't like. Finally, the Mavericks once again get stunlocked by their weaknesses, which is a mechanic that makes the game less interesting, but at least you can have some fun boss fights if you take them down with the X-Buster like I do. These are all minor criticisms, and what is overall a worthy sequel, but I hope you can understand why I prefer X1 now. Remember, that game was virtually perfect. Conversely, one of the biggest things X2 has over X1 is the routing. Now I like playing these games in an order where I can get the best upgrades first, minimize backtracking, and still grab all the items. X2 is one of the only games in the series where you can completely eliminate backtracking if you know certain tricks, which is just fantastic. My order through the game starts with Wire Sponge for his heart and sub-tank. By the way, there's a great grind spot for the sub-tank right before the boss. Now that's good game design. I then tackle Wheelgator, who stays not only has the best grind spot in the game against these respawning birds, but also has the amazing X-Buster upgrade. You're supposed to air dash to get it, but Wire Sponge's weapon latches onto walls and can actually get you up there with some fast wall jumps. It's very tricky to pull off. It took me 7 minutes to do it this playthrough, but the trick is as soon as you latch onto the wall, just mash the jump button and eventually you'll get up there. Wheelgator is usually one of the worst Mavericks in the series because of how slow and boring his boss fight is, with him camping in oil for most of it. But this playthrough he barely did that for some reason, so I can't complain too much. This is the only time in my life I actually had fun fighting him. I then do Overdrive Ostrich to grab the air dash, and then I take on Bubble Crab and Flamestag to get the second and third sub-tanks. You can get the sub-tank in the former stage early by doing this very precise jump off the ground and then jumping on top of the water. A little cryptic, but this is not the intended method, so I actually can't complain. I also fought Surges and Violin in these stages, because I wanted at least 2 sub-tanks before facing them. Crystal Snail is next, and his stage has this weird floating ride armor that can hover but usually falls short of grabbing the sub-tank, unless you know that you can hover for a bit longer by repeatedly tapping jump instead of holding it down. I wish the game communicated that better. I then end with Morph Moth and Magnus Centipede. The former stage nets you the damage reduction part that basically frees up the rest of the game, and in the latter level, I easily beat Agile. And that's my routing through the game. I love how you don't have to backtrack, and I wish other games in the series were like this. I really enjoy the final stages in this game. There's a lot of great platforming here, and applications of your special weapons. I just wish the bosses were a bit better designed. Like X1, there's a secret upgrade, this time in the 3rd X-Hunter stage. You have to get through this tricky platforming section that ends with you combining the charged speed burner weapon and air dash over spikes. Thankfully there's always an extra life here, so it'll never game over. But if you get through this section with full HP and have all special weapons, heart tanks, sub-tanks, and armor parts, you'll get the Shoryuken from Street Fighter that cooks bosses. I think it's easier to use than the Hadouken from X1. It allowed me to breeze through the dull boss rush. That is just a single stage in this game and every following X game. Sigma is actually pretty easy in this game. I remember thinking this even on my first playthrough. This run I beat him only using the X-Buster, and it still only cost me 1 sub-tank. For some reason he spawns enemies in the last phase that can drop health pickups, so you can actually out-heal him during the final boss. The fight would have been harder if I didn't get all of Zero's parts, but really not by much. Definitely one of the easiest final battles in the series. And that's Mega Man X2. I really like this game. X1 is a masterpiece, but there are many things in X2 that I think are actually superior, and it keeps the same core gameplay I love. And that's really all you can ask for in a sequel. I have some small complaints, but this is still an awesome game. Can I say it's art though? Not really. It's close, but I can't say it's a nearly flawless experience. But I would still highly recommend this game, and it's one of the best in the series. And now on to X3. Released in 1996 on the Super Nintendo, with ports on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, Capcom did not design most of the game this time. That was done by Minakuchi Engineering, the company that made the Mega Man games on the original Game Boy. This is the X game I have the least experience with. I remember playing it after X2, and I could not get past the 3rd Maverick stage for the life of me. I beat X2 in one day, but this game was just too hard. The first time I beat it was actually not on the X collection, but was when I emulated it on the Wii Homebrew channel because I needed save states to have a chance. I then replayed it at the end of high school as part of my Mega Man X binge, and replayed it a couple months later when the X Legacy collection first came out. And I liked it then, but it never stood out much to me, and that was the last time I played the game. It's been 6 years, so let's see what my opinion of it is now. The story is a Reploid named Dr. Doppler, nice physics reference by the way, cures all Reploids of going Maverick for a few months, only to go Maverick himself along with the Reploids that he just cured. X fights these Mavericks, and Dr. Doppler, where we learn that Sigma's true form is that of a computer virus, and he's corrupted Doppler. Sigma then returns in a new body and is defeated by X. He tries to possess X, but is foiled by Doppler or Zero depending on the ending. X wonders when peace between humanity and Reploids will be achieved, and we're told he'll have to fight Zero, which kinda comes out of nowhere in the ending without Zero. Yeah, the story here is really paper thin, but it's a Mega Man game so it's fine. It is kinda neat knowing Sigma's a computer virus, that's why he's able to come back every game. But how's the gameplay this time around? Well, it's largely the same as X2. Can you see why I combined these games? The main difference is supposed to be Zero. You can call him up during stages to play as him. He has a lot more health than X when you start out, and he even has a melee attack, as his final stage of the charge shot, called the Z-Saber. Sounds pretty cool, right? A new playable character is a massive innovation. The problem is Zero can't collect items or fight bosses. Every time you get to a mini-boss or boss door, X comes back, and Zero can't be called again even after the boss is beaten. I guess you can say they were trying to balance the mechanic, but as a result, there's almost no reason to use Zero. And God forbid you die with him. If Zero dies just one time, he's damaged for the rest of the game and can't be summoned ever again. It's like if you miss an X-Hunter in X2, but it matters a lot more. You see, in the second Doppler stage, there's a mini-boss that is the only one in the game you can fight with Zero. If you beat him, Zero gets damaged when the boss explodes, and gives X his Z-Saber for the rest of the game. And the Z-Saber is awesome. It's even better than the Hadouken or Shoryuken, since you can use it independently of your HP, it doesn't require special input, and it takes out half a boss's health bar. But if you died with Zero, you can never get this, which sucks, because the game doesn't tell you about this super strict policy. Zero died in my playthrough, and I forgot about this really dumb mechanic. I was almost going to restart the whole game until I remembered I can just find a password online that keeps all my collectibles and makes it so Zero didn't die. But I shouldn't have had to do that. Just don't use Zero in this game, trust me. The armor parts are back for X, and they're weird. The foot parts are awesome. Once again, you get the air dash, but now it can dash upwards instead of just left and right. There's a lot more vertical platforming in this game, so this really comes in handy. It's definitely better than the X2 air dash, which was already good. But then there's the Buster upgrade. I don't like it. You can fire 2 charge shots like in X2, but this time you can do them at once, which covers a lot more vertical area. That's the kind of thing that sounds a lot more useful on paper than it is in execution. You think the blast in the center will be stronger than the regular charge shot, but you'd be wrong. It's the same damage, except it puts you in lag after using it. The same thing happened with the upgraded shot in X2, except there it made sense, because the blast actually did more damage. It also slows down the game's frame rate when you use it. I actively try not to use this, to be honest. It really does feel like a nerf, which is crazy. How is X2 the only game with the Buster part that feels like an upgrade? I would recommend picking this up at the end, but the problem is the part still lets you charge up special weapons, so you need it early for that. Not because the charged special weapons are very useful, but because you need them to get the other armor parts and other collectibles. In X2, you could get all the armor parts independently of each other, but not in this game. If you want the body part, you need the foot parts from Blizzard Buffalo's level, and Tunnel Rhino's weapon to get the Buster part from Neon Tiger's stage. Then you need Gravity Beetle's weapon, and now, on your 5th Maverick stage, you can finally get the body armor part. Jeez man, the item game is really limited this time around. The body armor part once again cuts damage in half, but this time after you get hit, a shield is created that cuts damage down by 62%. Trust me, that's a godsend in this game, but we'll cover that in a bit. The head parts are easily the best version so far. They show a map at the start of the stage that marks items you haven't grabbed yet. It's a bit vague, but it did help me find everything in the end. However, the best thing it does is it tells you what items you're missing from every Maverick stage, which is extremely helpful. I wish every game had this, it's fantastic. So the third armor is definitely good, except for the arm parts, which are the most important. How do they fix the head parts but screw this up? I just don't get it. I don't really like the special weapons in this game. Most of them are a bit too slow and weak for my liking, especially because the enemies are really durable this time around. Some weapons are good like the Frost Shield, that always makes enemies drop health when they get hit by it. This is a game changer for grinding sub-tanks. Easily the best weapon in the game is the Spinning Blade from Crust Crawfish that destroys even the bulkiest of enemies. This one is extremely useful, especially because of how tough this game is. Wanna know what Maverick I did last? I mainly just used the X-Buster because I didn't like most of the special weapons. Instead of the X-Hunters gimmick, this time Doppler sends these guys bit and bite after you in 2 of the Maverick stages. And these 2 aren't optional, you're required to fight them. You can also fight a returning Vial from X1 in these secret transporters for a 2-phase boss battle. You then rematch these guys in the first 2 Doppler stages at the end of the game. But if you beat them with their weaknesses the first time around, they'll be destroyed, and you'll fight some different bosses at the end of those stages. The second Doppler stage even has different level design, depending on if Vial was destroyed or not. I think this is a neat feature that adds a little variety to the game. Side note, when I was a kid, I could not beat Bit for the life of me. That's when I started emulating this game to have a chance. The other change to the game structure is there are some new collectibles this time around. Well, kind of. You can now get 4 different ride armors that you can change into at these stations. This is an idea that had a lot of potential, but it's really underutilized by weird design choices. If you grab, say, the Frog armor first, you can't use it until you free the Chimera armor in Blast Hornet stage, which is another arbitrary limit on the item game. And these armors just aren't that useful because the stages are designed around regular X. The only time I ever used the Frog armor was to grab the Kangaroo armor, which I basically never used. What is this, a pyramid scheme? The main purpose of the ride armors are just to grab the other items. There are also enhancement chips you can collect that have an interesting mechanic. There are 4 of them, and you can only equip 1 of them at a time. So there's an element of strategy in which one to go with. Or, you can grab every collectible in the game except the enhancement chips, have full HP, and slide into this wall to get the gold armor from Dr. Light that gives you all 4 enhancement chip abilities. Oops. I don't even find these that helpful besides the enhanced body armor. Like one of them lets you heal if you stand in place, which is nice, But I already have 4 sub-tanks, so I don't really need that. These new collectibles are really undercooked and ultimately feel pointless. The main thing I remember about X3 is the difficulty. This game is very tough. Enemies have a lot more health and are much more aggressive than before. The weaker special weapons and mediocre charge shot also stack the deck against you. And then X himself is made of paper in this game. You take so much damage from attacks, especially against the bosses. Like I did Toxic Seahorse 4th, and it took all 3 of my sub-tanks to beat him. This is easily the hardest game to fight the Mavericks using only the X-Buster. I got a ton of game overs this playthrough. It doesn't help that extra lives are kinda rare this time around. It's also kinda hard to grind for sub-tank refills because of how aggressive enemies are. This screen on Toxic Seahorse's level became my go-to method because it's safe, near the start of the stage, and respawns the enemies fast. Since I hadn't played this game in so long, I refused to look at a guide and just tried to play the game as fresh as possible. This meant by the end of the game, I had to backtrack a lot, which I also didn't enjoy. I expected some backtracking, but I was shocked at how much I had to do because of the restricted item game. The routing is also a bit nonsensical. If you want this hard tank in Tunnel Rhino's level, you need to break this rock, and you do this by charging up Volt Catfish's weapon to shake it? What? I know it's causing an earthquake, but it's an electric weapon, that's so weird. Or how beating Blast Hornet depowers the bulky mech enemies and removes these crates from Gravity Beetle stage, allowing you to grab a heart tank. Why does beating him change any of that? I'm not very familiar with this game, so I'm not going to provide a best upgrades first, least backtracking guide this time around. It seems pretty hard in this game anyway, due to the restricted item game. But to give X3 its flowers, I really do like the final boss in this game. The first phase is this crazy game of dodging his fast attacks. And then his second phase, Kaiser Sigma, is insane because the armor blocks big charge shots from hitting him. So you need to be very precise in aiming your shots. The first phase of the charge shot, aka the Green Blast, is really good at hitting Sigma here. It's a very tough fight, but I really enjoyed it. This game came out in the last year of the Super Nintendo's lifespan, so the graphics are the best we've seen in this series yet, since developers really understood how to push the console to its limit. Backgrounds are more detailed than X2, and there's even more visual effects on screen, like the body armor's shield. The soundtrack is unfortunately a downgrade in my opinion. It's still good, but not as memorable as the music from the previous games. I've never found myself re-listening to songs from this game, and now I remember why. Earlier I mentioned how the game was ported to the PlayStation 1, and this version was ported to the original X collection, so it's actually the first one I played. It's largely the same, except there's some animated cutscenes added. I guess that was a common feature of 16-bit ports to the PS1, because some of the Final Fantasy games also did this. To be honest, I wasn't having that much fun playing this game. When I beat a boss in the previous games, I felt a sense of accomplishment, but here was just relief that it was over. Even outside the difficulty, I don't like the level design much in this game. I feel like I spend way too much time fighting enemies compared to standard platforming, that it breaks the pace a little, because you're constantly slowing down to fight, and the stages just aren't very memorable or distinct from each other. The whole game just felt like I was going through the motions. I have a quick interruption. Originally when I covered X3, I skipped over a ROM hack of the game called the Zero Project. I covered it later on, but it makes more sense to put it in the X3 section, so here it is for you to enjoy. The Zero Project was created by Justin3009 and adds a lot of quality of life fixes to X3. The most obvious change is making Zero a fully playable character you can swap to on the stage select screen, and he shares collectibles with X. By default, Zero has his double jump and air dash from later games, and has a little more health than X, which makes him really good for X3's insanely challenging early game. Although it still is hard for Zero. One of the drawbacks to playing as him is his special weapon consumption is double that of regular X, so for the first time in the series, you often run out of ammo with the character. Another one is while he can collect the armor parts for X, he cannot use them. X has also been tweaked. The head parts now have his special weapon consumption, which is awesome for the super useful Frost Shield weapon. And the upgraded charge shot has been altered so the smaller shots on the side cross each other on the screen, meaning the blast does much more damage than before. It's really strong now, and much more in line with the great buster parts from the other games. This is a fantastic change. I found when playing that I preferred X over Zero in the later stages when I had more upgrades, namely the third armor parts. Zero is definitely still good though, and I love how the game is designed around using both characters. We can all breathe a sigh of relief because X3's bad item game has been fixed. Many collectibles that were blocked off by arbitrary special weapons no longer are. For example, Zero's Z-Saber can now break these boulders in Tunnel Rhino stage, allowing him to fully complete the level with no backtracks. And you can get the damage reduction upgrade much earlier in the game, since you no longer need a charged version of the Gravity Well weapon. These changes give the player much more freedom in routing X3 and make it very possible to beat the game without backtracks. Here's the route I came up with, so pause the video if you want to use it for your run. And for the sake of completeness, here's the least backtracking route in the original X3. Other changes in the hack include new dialogue, the ability to use any right armor first, as long as you have its chip, and Zero can now get the black armor upgrade, which gives him damage reduction and powers up the Z-Saber. This is so cool. Plus a useful save feature has been added that looks great. My only complaints are the early game is still a bit too hard, and Bit and Bite are now random when they show up. This screwed me over in the third stage, where I beat Bit, died before making it to the boss room, and then Bite immediately spawned. How unlucky. I had to use up my last sub-tank to beat him this early, and then I got a fat game over to the Maverick. I liked it better when those encounters were spaced out. But overall, this is a great hack that fixes most of my issues with X3. I'd recommend checking it out. Returning to the original X3, I still did enjoy my playthrough because I like Mega Man X, but this is easily the weakest game in the retrospective so far. X3 is a good platformer that suffers from a lot of underdeveloped ideas, bizarre choices, and unfair difficulty at times. Mega Man X4 is one of the best games ever made. I've played a lot of games in my life, especially in the Mega Man series, and this is the big one. It's the one I want to review the most because it's my favorite. So what makes it so amazing? Well, let's get into it. The main innovation to the standard Mega Man X formula in this game is the inclusion of Zero. Unlike X3, he's a fully playable character this time with his own playthrough you select at the start. Zero plays pretty differently from X. He's a melee fighter, so you need to get up close and personal to all the enemies. You can use the Z-Saber to slash at enemies with the 3-piece combo on the ground or slice them down in the air. He can't collect armor parts or special weapons, but instead he gets techniques when he defeats Mavericks. And these are pretty useful. Like one gives him the air dash, another nets him an uppercut, one is a strong Giga attack that fires in every direction and is the only projectile Zero gets. But easily the best technique is the double jump, which is really helpful in a platformer and also upgrades the aerial slash to swing in a circle around Zero. This is really great since you can hit more enemies just as long as you're close enough to them. It's also pretty strong and is the main way I attack enemies with Zero. So Zero's gameplay is solid. His different playstyle makes his playthrough feel distinct from X while still being fun. But what about Mega Man X? Well, he's here and he's amazing. X plays basically the same as he did in the Super Nintendo games. One thing that's different is you can now dash jump by holding down the button before pressing jump, whereas before you had to press both buttons at the same time. It's a small change, but I like it. As always, the main thing that's new with X is his armor parts. The leg parts once again give you the horizontal air dash, but this time you get the ability to hover in the air for a few seconds, which is amazing on boss fights when they try to hit you on the ground. I use this much more than the leg parts in the previous games. I also like the contrast where X gets to hover in the air, while Zero gets an extra jump. The body part as always halves the damage you take, and has a single use Giga attack. This time it's called the Nova Strike, but like in X2, I never use this. Still, damage reduction by 50% is always nice. And now we get to the mother of all armor parts in the series, the Buster parts. There are actually 2 in this game, and you're free to choose which one you want. The stock charge shot gives you 4 mini charge shots to fire individually. To be honest, I've never really used this, because after you get the Buster parts, you have to fight this mini boss, and it's actually kind of annoying with this upgrade. I know some people prefer it, and it's what the speedrun goes with, so I know it's good. But every time I play this game, I always choose the Plasma Charge Shot. This attack increases the size of the blast, and leaves behind plasma whenever it hits an enemy, inflicting additional damage. It's very useful for beating basically everything in the game. Even the bulkiest of enemies die to one blast, and it obliterates many bosses too. And it's solid on boss fights, since most of them stay in place for a few seconds, so they almost always take the plasma damage. It's just amazing. Most of my playthroughs of this game have actually been Buster only, because I find it really comfortable and fun in this game. In fact, X4 was the first game where I started fighting the Maverick stage bosses with only the Buster, because I realized learning the patterns was more fun than, well, this. So the Buster parts are an A+ for the plasma shot alone. Oh, and they let you charge up special weapons too. Speaking of, the head parts this time around give you unlimited ammo for regular special weapons. You'd think that would be really good, but I basically never run out of ammo for special weapons in these games. Even in X1, which had the best special weapons in the series, you always got generous amounts of it. And the special weapons for X in this game are just fine. The Twin Slasher is pretty cool, and I like how Soul Body projects a copy of X that hurts enemies. The Lightning Web weapon is also neat, in that you can wall jump off it, which helps get some collectibles. But the rest I barely use. They're a bit irrelevant because of how busted the plasma shot is. Maybe they could have nerfed it on regular enemies to give you more reason to use the special weapons, but I'm not complaining much. I personally would have preferred if the head parts worked the same as the ones in X3 that let you identify what collectibles you were missing in every stage. I just think that's a feature every X game should have. It's not like collectibles are even hard to find in this game, but it would have been a bit more helpful in my opinion. Regardless, the amazing leg and buster parts make the 4th armor my favorite in the series. So those are the main differences between X and Zero in terms of gameplay. Zero gets better abilities after defeating bosses, while X gets incredible armor parts. There are other differences too. Like Zero's playthrough is quite harder than X's, since he never gets the damage reduction upgrade and has to fight enemies up close, meaning he's more likely to get hit. Some of the Mavericks don't have weaknesses as Zero, which is a little weird, but I never use weaknesses on the bosses, so it doesn't bother me. X has an exclusive boss fight halfway through the game, while Zero gets a cutscene against the guy instead. And in the second to last level, they each have a different boss to fight at the beginning of the stage. But other than that, the playthroughs are the same, in that they fight the same bosses and go through the same stages. I personally prefer X's playthrough a bit more than Zero's, mainly because of the 4th armor, and I like fighting from a distance. The game follows the standard structure in the series. There's an intro level, 8 Mavericks to fight in a non-linear order, some final stages, and a bunch of collectibles to grab. Once again, every Maverick stage contains a heart tank, but this time you only get 2 sub-tanks. I actually prefer this, since I think the game is balanced well around only being able to heal yourself twice. X2 kinda turned me away from having 4 sub-tanks. The other collectibles this time around are the weapon tank and the EX tank. The weapon tank restores your special weapon ammo, and if that sounds useless in this game, you're correct, since Zero's techniques don't use ammo except for the Giga attack, and X never runs out of special weapon ammo. And even if he did, it's unlimited anyway if you have the head parts. Very strange how the game with infinite special weapon ammo also gives you an item to refill it. And then the EX tank raises your maximum lives from 2 to 4, which sounds very helpful, except X4 kinda doesn't have lives anyway. Let me explain. In this game, every stage except the spaceport has 2 sections separated by a loading screen. Whenever you game over, you go back to the second section instead of the beginning of the level, which is what happened in the previous games. So the only real purpose of more lives is to give you more chances against the Maverick bosses and the boss rush. Because if you lose to one of those, you go back to the start of the section instead of the boss door or the partially completed boss rush. So it does have a purpose unlike the weapon tank, it's just a bit niche. But hey, I do like how game overs don't kick you back to the start of the level. It's cool this game does that. Another neat feature is saving. The previous games all relied on passwords, but now you can save the game to a file. And you can even reload the final levels without having to replay Spaceport over again. That's awesome. To go back to the levels, they're really fun. They have the perfect mix of fast-paced platforming and combat, and they all feel distinct from each other without being gimmicky. Like Split Mushroom stage has a lot more vertical platforming than normal, some stages like Storm Owl and Slash Beast have ride armor sections, where Cyber Peacock's level is all about making it to the end as fast as possible to get S ranks while dodging these yellow orbs that slow you down. You need S ranks to get all the collectibles in the stage. This is how you keep a game consistently fun and exciting the whole time. I would say the only level I don't like is Jet Stingrays, that's an auto-scroller on a ride chaser. The main issue I have with this stage isn't that it's an auto-scroller, it's a fast level, so that's fine. The problem is it's kinda hard to grab the sub-tank without dying in my experience. I've played this game countless times, and I usually have to do the second half of the level at least twice, which is annoying. But other than that, the levels are great. One thing I really like is all of them have descriptions explaining what the Maverick is doing and why we're fighting them. Like Slash Beast stage is on a bunch of trains that are Repliforce's supply route, so by beating him, we're cutting off their supplies. Details like this make the fictional world come alive a little. The same goes with the short dialogue with the Mavericks before you fight them. It's not much, but it's cool we get to know their personalities a little. Speaking of, the boss fights are the highlights of the game for me. It's very enjoyable figuring out their patterns so you can dodge their moves and attack them when they're vulnerable. Some are pretty hard without their weakness, namely Storm Owl and Cyber Peacock. Cyber Peacock in particular is kinda crazy since he teleports around and his attacks are fast, especially this missile that lasts for a while. You gotta be moving the whole time against this thing. The fight is also much harder as Zero since it's tricky to get close to him without taking damage. But it always feels rewarding when you beat the Mavericks in this game. I'm very happy to report the item game is much better in X4 than in the last game. There's only a few collectibles blocked off by special weapons this time, so you have much more freedom in how you route the game. And the routing's different between the two characters as well, since they get different upgrades. With Zero, I always start with Split Mushroom. Now this boss is admittedly pretty tough to do first, since he's moving around a lot and even makes a copy of himself. I used to game over on this guy a ton, so he's definitely not the greatest for beginners. But beating him unlocks the double jump and the circular slash, which is why he's always the first on my list. Next I do Jet Stingray's level, partially to get it over with, partially to get the air dash, but mainly for the first sub-tank. And I just died. I then took on Magma Dragoon, who you can actually fight in a ride armor, which helps because he's really aggressive otherwise. Beating him unlocks the uppercut, and with that, you can get every collectible at Zero now, since Dragoon's weapon unlocks the heart tanks and the Frost Walrus and Web Spider stages. I personally did Frost Walrus next, because his level has the best grind spot in the game for your sub-tanks, with the upper pathway at the start of the level, which gives out a ton of free health that fills up half a tank and gives you an extra life too. After that, I did Cyber Peacock for the second sub-tank, followed by Storm Owl, / Beast, and then I ended with Web Spider. That gets you every collectible for Zero, with no backtracks, although that's not hard to do, because his playthrough is really flexible. Magma Dragoon's weapon is the only real roadblock. X's playthrough is a little bit more limited, but still gives you a lot of freedom. With X, I always start off with Web Spider's level to get the like parts and his weapon, Lightning Web. I then take on Storm Owl, because now that I have Lightning Web, I can get the Plasma Shot as soon as possible. I then did Jet Stingray to get him over with, and grab the sub-tank. Now I have a lot of choices in what states to tackle next, and I always mix it up. This playthrough I did Cyber Peacock for the head parts and the second sub-tank. I haven't mentioned this yet, but I adore this level. It's the best stage in any X game in my opinion. I love how it's all about platforming and shooting your way to the end while you're racing against the clock. It's a lot of fun, and I'm proud I can get the S ranks first try now. It's actually easier as Zero because his sword slashes through the orbs, and the double jump is better for fast platforming. Next, I tackled / Beast and Magma Dragoon because / Beast's weapon, when fully charged, unlocks the body armor part in Dragoon's level. And the last two I did were Frost Walrus and Split Mushroom. I probably could have done Split Mushroom earlier for his soul body weapon, but I really enjoy how in this routing, I did Zero's first Maverick last with X, and X's first Maverick last with Zero. I think that's cute. And that's my route through the game with X. I'm really happy it nets me the two best armor parts first, and that I can play through the game without backtracking with either character. But wait, a viewer very familiar with X4 is saying, when did I grab the Heart Tank and Web Spider stage with X? You need Dragoon's weapon to get it, and I was missing it at the time. Well, the answer is, I didn't. I realized years ago that I've played this game so much that I don't need to backtrack for one Heart Tank. If it's your first playthrough, getting this would be a good idea, but I know this game like the back of my hand at this point. With X, you always need to do at least one backtrack to get all the items in this game, which is a little unfortunate because X2 isn't like this, but just one is okay. Especially since there's a ton of different routes with minimal backtracking, unlike X3. Theoretically, you can miss out on a Heart Tank in the first 3 X games to avoid backtracking too, but in those games, you needed every collectible to get the secret move, and X4 doesn't have one of those, so you don't need every item. Instead of a secret move, there are 2 cheat codes you can input at the character select screen. X can get the ultimate armor from any Dr. Light capsule, that aside from looking cool, immediately unlocks the whole 4th armor, and it gives X unlimited Nova Strike attacks. I do wish you could get this in the main playthrough, because it'd be really helpful in the boss rush, but oh well. Zero meanwhile just gets a recolor. That's kinda lame, but it does look nice. X4 was the first entry in the series to be developed for the PlayStation 1. This means the graphics are much better than the previous games on the Super Nintendo. The character designs, visual effects, backgrounds, even the extra lives are all improved, and they still hold up today, since the game uses 2D sprites that have aged much better than early 3D models. In particular, I really like the visual effects and the designs for X and Zero. The way they move is so fluid. This game added an afterimage effect whenever they dash to emphasize how fast they're going, which I think is a nice touch. And then the look of Zero swinging his Z-Saber, or X firing a plasma charge shot, are very visually appealing to me. The PS1 X games are my favorite art style for any Mega Man game. The soundtrack in this game is good too. It's not amazing. X1 and maybe X2 have the better music, since the songs in this game are more atmospheric, but they're still enjoyable. My favorite track is Web Spider's level. X4 also has some voice lines from the characters during gameplay. X and Zero let out grunts anytime they jump, like Link in Ocarina of Time, and some of the end bosses have voice lines right before the battle begins. That part makes more sense, since this game is the first in the series to have voice acting in the cutscenes. Oh right, I haven't discussed the story yet. The plot is there's a Reploid army called Repliforce, whose general meets with Sigma. Sigma wants them to go Maverick, but when their general refuses, Sigma gets the Maverick Hunter Magma Dragoon to cross the Sky Lagoon into the city below, killing countless innocent people. Repliforce is framed for the incident, and they respond by refusing to clear their names out of pride and declaring their independence from humanity. Okay, stop. First of all, why does the general not see that by declaring independence, he's doing what Sigma wanted him to do? Why does Repliforce let themselves be framed without even trying to prove they didn't kill innocent people? Who does that? And why is Cyber Peacock trying to destroy the internet if these guys aren't Mavericks? This story is pretty dumb. X and Zero have to go and fight the Repliforce members and the traitorous Magma Dragoon. Dragoon is present in the intro stage and has unique dialogue with X and Zero after you defeat him, which is actually pretty cool. I like the idea that one of the 8 Mavericks you fight is uniquely important to the story, and the game hints he's working for Sigma because his health bar has Sigma's symbol on it, whereas the other Mavericks have the Repliforce symbol. Repliforce eventually goes into space, where X and Zero defeat the Colonel, the General, and Sigma, who is so comically evil in this game that he tries to blow up the planet with a laser. I thought he just hated humans. How does destroying Earth help with that? That's just lazy writing. The General sacrifices himself to stop the weapon, and X and Zero return home. That's what's shared across both stories. X and Zero's campaigns do differ from each other. X works with this guy named Double, who is revealed to have been a spy for Sigma, and Double crosses him. Pun entirely intended there, by the way, blame Capcom. Reminded of all the Reploids he knows who have gone Maverick, he calls Zero and begs to be killed if he goes Maverick himself. Zero's story is much more substantial. He keeps dreaming about his creator, who he doesn't recognize, but we know it's Dr. Wily from the classic series. He saves the Colonel's sister Iris, who is torn between her love for Zero and her brother. Things get really complicated when Zero kills the Colonel. Iris attacks Zero, and she dies after the battle. Zero is heartbroken and goes to confront Sigma, who reveals in a flashback that Zero used to be a Maverick. He fought Sigma and is actually the person who gave him his scars. But something inside his helmet interrupted Zero, allowing Sigma to win the battle. Zero is cured of being a Maverick, but it's implied that this fight is what corrupted Sigma in the first place, kickstarting the events of the whole X series. Zero then defeats Sigma, and reflects back on how he used to be a monster, and just had to kill his kind of girlfriend and her brother. Hey Zero, want some ice cream when you get back from your mission?
Iris, did we Reploids all turn out to be Mavericks after all?
Seriously, is that a no on the ice cream? X's story definitely feels like small potatoes compared to Zero's, huh? I like how X is confronted by the question, what happens if he goes Maverick? It's never paid off, but it's a neat idea at least. There are more positives to say about Zero's story. Everything with Dr. Wily and Sigma is great development that makes Zero an interesting character because he was definitely not made to be a hero. That's the best idea in this story because it parallels X and Zero, since X was created by Dr. Light to help humanity. So them being friends is ironic, and it really does seem like fate that they would eventually have to fight each other. On the other hand, everything with Repliforce falls flat because the conflict isn't written well. It doesn't work as a battle of two opposing philosophies when we know basically nothing about humans in the X timeline, so I don't understand why Repliforce wants to be independent from them. And of course Sigma is pulling the strings the whole time, so it's not really a battle of ideologies. The Repliforce are also so dumb. And then Iris gets no development as a character, so I can't feel bad for her when she dies, especially because her brother was the Colonel. So the story is kinda bad, but it is a more involved plot than the previous games, and Zero's backstory is legitimately good. And I do like how there are animated cutscenes, especially because they gave us gems like this.
Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
Yeah, the English voice acting is awful, but it works in a so bad it's good way. It's funny because the game takes itself so seriously, and meanwhile X sounds like this.
Wait, Zero! I'm serious!
10 out of 10. The translation for Mega Man games in this period has always been bad, but it's definitely worse than usual in X4. The most notable example is Sigma reminding Zero that he was a Maverick, and then after the flashback, Sigma's surprised he was a Maverick. Bro, it's your flashback! Okay, the question mark is not supposed to be there, but I hope you can understand how bad the translation can be. But at the end of the day, the story isn't why people play these games, and I skip the cutscenes most of the time anyway. Returning to the gameplay, the final levels are solid in this game. The first is well designed because it encourages you to use your special weapons to beat the enemies. You fight the Colonel here, who I ironically think is easier than when you fight him halfway through X's playthrough because you can dodge his attacks with wall jumps this time. The second stage has 2 splitting paths, a tough ride armor section, and a pretty easy platforming sequence. The general fight at the end of the level is really weird. With Zero, it's potentially the hardest fight in the game, since it's really tough to get close to him and attack without taking damage yourself. I pretty much always have to use at least one sub-tank here. Conversely with X, it's literally the easiest fight in the game, because the plasma charge shot hits him across the stage, meaning you don't have to jump on his hands at all. How sad is it that I'm kicking his ass and we're not even on the same screen? The boss rush is boring as always. It's a bit worse in this game actually, since there's no insta-kill moves and explosions take longer, which sucks. And now we get to the final boss. You can only damage his first phase with Magma Dragoon's weapon, and he's pretty easy to dodge, since after his third teleport, he'll always swing his scythe across the stage, so you can wall jump over him. In the second phase, he throws his scythe in an arc that can be easily dodged, then he throws the scythe again, and it lands either on the floor or on one of the walls, depending on your positioning. If it lands on the ground, you can't really stand there because of the electricity, and he spawns these boomerangs that home in on you while Sigma is still attacking. It's very hard to dodge all that. Make sure it lands on the wall, because then you can run to the other wall and easily attack Sigma while he shoots a laser across the ground. When you know what you're doing, these 2 phases are very easy. The final phase has more attacks and 2 separate health bars, but it's not too bad when you get the patterns down. It's definitely easier as X, since you can destroy these heads with the plasma shot. Recently when I've played this game, I beat the whole final boss without using a single sub-tank with either character. This time I did need a sub-tank for Zero. But with X, I beat the whole thing without using a single sub-tank. In fact, I beat the whole game without ever using a sub-tank on X, which I didn't even realize. Were there times I should have used one? Who's to say? This is the only game I can do this in, by the way. So the final boss is great. I would say it's a fair challenge that really tests your skills. It's a fitting end to an amazing journey. I've covered a lot so far in this review, but there's one important part that's still missing. My experience with this game. I first played X4 on the X collection when I was a 12-year-old who couldn't make it far in X3. I played through the game with X and made it all the way to Sigma, who I couldn't beat at the time. I then tried playing the game as Zero and I could not get very far with him. So I just gave up and didn't play the other games in the X series, even after I emulated X3. I played the whole classic series, but the X games are too tough for me. I then just replayed X1 until I stopped playing Mega Man games. But then one day when I was 17, we had just come home from visiting colleges and I had a desire to play X4. So I bought the game for like $5 on my PS3 and played as Zero. I tried over and over again to beat Split Mushroom until I finally did, and I was eventually able to beat the whole game. I then played and beat it as X, and then I just kept on playing it. A lot. When you skip the cutscenes, this game is pretty short. You can beat one of the 2 playthroughs in barely an hour if you know what you're doing. So it became a routine when I was bored that I would play X4, usually on a Friday night during my senior year when I didn't have a social life. I could always just rely on this game to have a good time. And it got me back into the X series. I played the other games too, and then revisited X2, X3, and classic Mega Man. X1 is the game that got me into the series, but X4 made me into a big fan. Mega Man is my 3rd favorite game series, behind Sonic and Pokemon, and it's all because of this game. It's the Mega Man game I go back to the most. I can't even count how many times I've played it. I replay both playthroughs at least once every year. It's just so much fun and comforting really, I have good memories associated with it too. I have some minor complaints that I discussed in this video, but I love this game. It's up there with X1 in terms of quality, although I like X4 a bit more. This is the best Mega Man game to me. There's barely a dull moment, there's a lot of freedom in the item game, Zero as a playable character is a really fresh addition, the production values are very good, the levels are great, the bosses are awesome, and X is the most fun he's ever been because of the 4th armor. I'd put it in my top 5 games of all time. It's just art. Mega Man X5 is a very strange entry in the series. It tries hard to shake up an established formula in very unexpected ways. More than any other X game, or even any other Mega Man game period, X5 is really divisive. Some people don't vibe with this game at all, whereas others really enjoy it. For some people, it's even the best in the series. So what do I think about it? After all, I loved X4, and this game is its direct sequel. Well, let's dive right in. As soon as the intro level starts, you can already tell this game is going to be different. Meet Alia the Navigator, and she tells you what's going on. Okay, that's interesting. Guess there's going to be more dialogue in this game. Oh, she just stopped me during the stage. That's weird. And now she stopped me again to give a written tutorial. This is getting old, but hey, it's just the intro level. Maybe they're just doing something different. I'm sure the Maverick stages will be fine. Oh no, she interrupts you at the start of every Maverick stage? Nope, scratch that. At almost every section of every Maverick stage. What? I walked her 2 seconds and she just stopped me again. Alia does not stop talking to you in this game. It happens so many times, and yes, you can button mash through the text, but this is so overkill. It's like the game assumes I'm 5 years old. Was this not playtested? Almost all of her dialogue in the stages is unnecessary, and it just destroys the pacing. Yikes. The core gameplay is very similar to X4. You can still play as X and Zero, and they handle the same as before. I forgot to mention this in my previous videos, but the controls in these games have always been smooth. You feel like you're in perfect control of your character. I think the PlayStation X games feel a bit better and more precise than the SNES games, but that might also just be because I have more experience with them. What's different this time is X and Zero can now grab onto these zip lines to move around in, and crouching has been added to give you another way to dodge certain enemy attacks. At first I didn't think much of these mechanics, but I think they're well implemented. The crouching especially comes in handy a few times. So they're neat features. Oh, and X can't shoot through walls anymore. That's something. If you open the options menu, you'll see there's some new features in this game. There's a difficulty select between normal, easy, and extreme. I've usually just played the game on normal, including my playthroughs for this video, and extreme mode doesn't change much, aside from adding more enemies on screen. There's a rapid fire mode, and the ability to auto-charge the X-Buster, which I actually use quite a bit as X, because I'm usually charging a shot with him anyway. There's also an optional training mode for beginners, and a slow mode. But why would you play the game this way? It's like you're underwater. Oh my god, get this off the screen. Unlike X4, X and Zero are both usable in the same playthrough this time, which sounds awesome, since you can make one campaign have more variety than ever before in this series. The issue with that concept is X and Zero don't share heart tanks. This means by using them together, they're actually going to end up weaker by the end of the game than if you only use one of them. What makes it weirder is they share the 2 sub-tanks, the returning weapon and EX tanks, special weapons, parts, hell, Zero can even grab the armor upgrades for X. Everything is transferable except the heart tanks. Why? This completely cancels out the benefit of using them together. I did 2 playthroughs of this game for X and Zero, but I really wish all my collectibles were transferable, and I could have just done one playthrough. After beating the intro level, we reach the stage select screen, and it's here where we learn about the main gimmick of X5. There are 16 hours until this space colony called Eurasia crashes into the Earth and kills everyone. I'll explain why this is happening later. Probably. To prevent this from happening, you need to destroy the colony, and there are 2 methods to achieve this. You can either power up this piece of junk cannon called the Enigma to blow it up, or if that fails, you can enhance the space shuttle Zero pilots that can also destroy the colony. A big cannon and a space colony. This game is like a reverse Sonic Adventure 2. The reason why we're fighting the Mavericks in this game is the ones on the left side have items to power up the Enigma, whereas the ones on the right have items to help the shuttle. You can fire the Enigma and launch the shuttle anytime you want, but the odds of destroying the colony substantially increase with the more items you have, so you want to tackle the Maverick stages. Each one of them takes up an hour, leaving you with only 8 to spare. Actually make that 6, because this guy called Dynamo always fights you twice, and each of those encounters also takes an hour. If the Enigma failed, and you ran out of time before the shuttle parts were all collected, the shuttle is launched anyway, and it probably fails, which locks you into the bad ending. But still, this probably won't happen, just as long as you collect all the items from the Mavericks, right? Well, no. First of all, the Enigma, even with all its parts collected, is extremely unlikely to ever destroy the colony. I've played this game countless times, and it only destroyed the colony one time when I had no parts and I just YOLO'd it. Some guy made a Reddit post after looking into the game's code to figure out the RNG, and basically the Enigma with 0 parts is 6.25% to work, and with 1 to 4 parts, that goes up to 12.5%. So basically the other 3 Enigma parts don't actually increase your odds at all, even though that would make sense. The shuttle is much more likely to destroy the colony, but it's not guaranteed. With 0 parts, it's 12.5% to work, and that goes up with the more parts you collect. But at best with 3 to 4 parts, it's only 75% to work. So the good and bad endings are separated by a random 25%. Okay, technically it's more like 21.875% when you consider the conditional probability from the Enigma, but you get the point. The problem with triggering the bad ending is it prevents you from using 0 for the rest of the game. So you can play through the game as 0, get all the Enigma and shuttle parts, and be locked out of using him for the rest of the game if you get the unlucky 25%. Which is a really poor design decision, because remember, X and 0 don't share heart tanks. So if the now defunct 0 took most of the heart tanks, you gotta play through the rest of the game with a weaker X. You can mitigate this by reloading a past save before you got all the shuttle parts to reset your RNG, which is what I always did, but like what first time player is gonna know to do that? Making the endings RNG and so punishing just sucks and has deservedly ticked off a lot of players. There's a slight difference in your playthrough depending on if you select X or 0 at the very start. Choosing 0 gives you the Z-Buster, which is a projectile that's slow, laggy, and has pathetic damage. Never take this, it's a joke. Choosing X on the other hand gives you the 4th armor. It's been nerfed from X4 to balance getting it so early. It no longer gives you infinite special weapons, and the plasma shot no longer does additional damage to most enemies, although the effect still lingers on the screen for some reason. But the blasts are still massive, you can still hover in the air, and the body armor once again cuts the damage you take in half. This is a great feature that really helps with the early game. I feel like X can take on any Maverick first without much issue with this equipped. You can still use unarmored X, but there's really not much point in this game. The collectibles are the same as X4, except there are 2 armor sets this time. That means every stage has a light capsule to collect. However, unlike the previous games, you can't use the individual parts because it's too dangerous? What? That doesn't make sense. So you need to wait until all 4 parts are collected before you can use the Falcon or Guy armor. Now you do have the 4th armor, so this isn't the worst thing ever, but it's another dumb game decision. The Falcon armor is interesting in that its combat capabilities are worse than the 4th armor. The charge shot is much smaller, you can't charge special weapons, and there's no air dash or hover. Instead, its strength lies in its mobility. You can fly with this armor for a couple seconds, and you're even invincible during it. The flight can damage enemies too. It's a really cool armor that's fun to use during levels and helps grab collectibles. There's also a Giga attack, but I don't think I ever used it. The Gaia armor on the other hand kinda sucks. It can cling to walls, walk on spikes, and destroys these V-cubes. It also has a strong charge shot that does look cool with the dark green visual effect. The problem is, well, everything else. The shots have less range than normal, you can't use special weapons at all with it, there's no air dash or mobility upgrade, and general mobility on the ground or from dashing is reduced. This might be the worst armor set in the series. I basically only ever use it to grab collectibles. Speaking of, let's discuss the worst element of X5, its item game. Man, what went wrong here? Okay, so with X, the way the items work is the stages on the left with the Enigma parts contain the Falcon armor, and the stages on the right with the shuttle parts contain the Gaia armor. To get every item in the game, you generally need to go through the stages holding the Gaia armor upgrades while you're wearing the Falcon armor, and the stages holding the Falcon armor upgrades while you're wearing the Gaia armor. But because you need to unlock both armor sets, this means you have to do a ton of backtracking no matter how you route the game. And it's even more limited than that because you can't obtain all 4 Gaia armor parts without unlocking the full Falcon armor first. I had to do 5 backtracks in this game, which is just awful. The worst example is Tidal Whale stage. Oh my god, this is one of the worst levels in the whole series. It's a super slow auto-scroller with multiple mini-bosses having obnoxiously long health bars. For some reason, you need Tidal Whale's weapon to get the Falcon armor part here. So you have to replay the boring stage again after beating him to get it. And then, to get the heart tank, get this, you need the Gaia armor. Meaning you have to play this stage a 3rd time. It's just a terrible level. I have no idea why they designed it like this. Thankfully, this isn't an issue for Zero. Because you can't wear the armor parts, you can just ignore them and focus on the other collectibles. Zero also can't obtain some of the heart tanks, probably so X isn't completely screwed if you lose Zero because the colony survived. So there's even less to collect. What this all adds up to is you can play the game as Zero and never have to backtrack, which is fantastic and how it should have been for X2. This is one of the reasons why I like Zero's playthrough more in this game. The other reason as well, Zero is basically a god in X5. His damage output is just ludicrous. You destroy everything so fast. And his circular slash technique is so much larger than the last game too. It's basically a projectile this time. Not even bosses stand a chance against Zero. It's really fun to use him in this game. Unbalanced for sure, but still enjoyable. Zero's other techniques are helpful too, but like look at this hitbox, my god. X's special weapons are definitely worse than usual in this game. Crescent Grizzlies is pretty good when you charge it up, because it creates a strong hitbox around X, and I like the Darkhold that stops time temporarily. But that's it. Everything else is just underwhelming, outside of beating certain bosses. Another new mechanic in this game is the part system. Bosses in X5 have levels below their health bars that change throughout the game. If a boss is level 4 or above, when you defeat them, you can choose between an upgrade to your health or an upgrade to your weapon energy. The health upgrades function the same as a heart tank. Every Maverick gives you this choice, so you could potentially get up to 16 heart tanks in this game. You might be wondering why you wouldn't just always choose the health upgrade. Well, the reason is, if you beat a boss who's level 8 or higher, you get access to plus versions of the upgrades. And these give you parts that you can equip onto X and Zero. Now you don't need any of these to beat the game, but some of them are very helpful and fun. Like the shock buffer that gives Zero or unarmored X the body armor's damage reduction. Or the Z-Saber Plus that makes Zero's attacks even stronger. But the best upgrade is Speedster that makes X and Zero faster. This is so great to use, especially with the Falcon armor, because you can just breeze through entire stages. It's awesome. You can equip 4 parts at once, unless X is wearing an armor, where he can only equip 2 parts, since the armor is already enhancing his abilities. And the Gaia armor can't equip any parts, because I guess Capcom thought it'd be too broken or something. Man, this armor sucks. So I really like the parts system. It's the best mechanic in the game. Unfortunately, like the rest of X5, it's not implemented very well. Everything I just explained is not detailed in the actual game at all, not even which parts the Mavericks give you. I always have to look that up, which is pretty annoying. And some features like boss level are kinda complicated because it's determined by the amount of time left and your hunter rank. Oh yeah, X and Zero have rankings in this game, by the way. The way boss level works is when you have less time left, the levels rise, and that's when you can get the parts that can be equipped. This should have been cool, because now there's a risk versus reward element to routing in the game. You can get more parts to equip if you cut it even closer with the timer. It could also open up even more routes in the game, because there's even more useful collectibles to grab than ever before. The problem is X's item game is already so horrible that I just ignore routing for his parts, other than the Speedster one. Thankfully, Zero doesn't have that issue, but still, this feature could have been better implemented. The stages in X5 are strange. They're a lot slower paced than usual. Obviously, Tidal Whale stage is the epitome of this, but even Spiral Pegasus' level has a lot of auto-scroller sections. Or Volkraken stage, where... Did I just die before Reddy left the screen? Or Volkraken stage, where the whole gimmick of the second half is unlocking 2 doors at around the same time to progress further into the level. The first half of the stage is a pretty brutal ride chaser sequence, where you need to button mash hard to progress through and collect these orbs at the same time to get the light capsule. It sucks. This is the one time I recommend enabling the rapid fire feature in the options. Trust me, it makes this so much more bearable. On the other hand, some stages like Spike Rose Red and Dark Necrobat are pretty fun because they're just regular Mega Man X levels. Although Necrobats has this odd slowdown mechanic at the start that I originally thought was just slowdown from the background. So overall, I'd say the stages are a mixed bag, definitely nowhere near as good as the ones in X4. I don't really have much to say about the bosses in this game. Because X starts out with the 4th armor, and Zero is a Reploid god, they're not very hard to fight without their weaknesses. I'm not a big fan of Spiral Pegasus's ridiculous knockback sending me to my death, or Tidal Whale pushing me into spikes, but whatever. Game overs in X5 always send you back to the last checkpoint, so even annoyances like this aren't too bad. The most interesting thing about the bosses is in the original English localization of the game, their names were references to the band Guns N' Roses, but that's since been changed for the modern re-releases. I still really do want to call this guy Duff McWhalen though. In terms of graphics, I think the game looks a bit worse than X4. There are just some backgrounds and designs that look ugly in this game, especially Sigma's last phase. It feels like this game had a smaller budget than before. Nowhere is this more apparent than the cutscenes which aren't animated like X4. They're very cheap slideshows that you can't even skip. Not a fan of these. Voice acting has also been removed. No one even announces the name of the game like in X4. Come on, that guy was important. I don't play these games to read. I still do like the art style and animations in X5, but the graphics are definitely a step back, especially for a PS1 game released in 2000. Final Fantasy IX came out a few months before this, and that game looked great. If there's one thing I can unequivocally praise about X5 though, it's the soundtrack. It's phenomenal in this game. It might be better than the iconic X1 score. Almost every song perfectly fits the mood, and it definitely elevates the experience. My favorite tracks are probably the opening theme, Spike Rose Red stage, and the end credits song, which is just so somber. I love it. So far I've described X5 as a bit of a mixed bag, and that's because it is. But I want to say that I do like this game. There are so many issues with it, but the core gameplay is still fun, and most of the levels are enjoyable, especially because the game still runs on the great X4 engine. And when you know what you're doing with the part system, or skip some heart tanks to reduce the terrible backtracking, or just play the game as Zero, that makes the experience even better. Don't get me wrong, this is still easily the weakest game so far, aside from X3, but I do enjoy it. This might be the game in the series I've played the second most, which can mainly be attributed to my love for X4, but I want to stress that the good outweighs the bad for me in this game, even though the overall game design is not great. Okay, I've avoided talking about the story long enough, so let me break down what happens. This game establishes that whenever Reploids go Maverick, it's because of a virus. This is what happened to Sigma in X4 after he fought Zero. It's called the Maverick virus, and in this game, Sigma releases a worldwide form of it, dubbed the Sigma virus, that infects many Reploids, including the Maverick bosses in this game. At the same time, Dynamo has been hired by Sigma to send the space colony Eurasia, which has also been infected by the virus, crashing down to Earth, where it will kill everyone unless X and Zero stop it. They have 16 hours to do so using the Enigma or shuttle. Along the way, X and Zero encounter the Sigma virus during stages that will damage X if he gets infected too many times, but will actually heal Zero. This is part of the story where everyone is concerned that the virus is strengthening Zero. That's a nice attention to detail. Now we get into the different endings. In the bad ending, Zero fails to destroy the colony with the shuttle, and it crashes into Earth. The planet barely avoids extinction, and Zero winds up transformed by the virus, finally becoming the Maverick Dr. Wily wanted him to be. This is why Zero isn't playable in this ending. At the colony crash site, a new virus called the Zero virus is detected, and X travels there to investigate and confront Zero. X and Zero have their fated battle that's been hyped up since X3, and it ends in a draw. Zero is snapped back to normal, and X goes to confront Sigma, who reveals that he did all this to awaken Zero. He also says that he's been working with Dr. Wily on this plan. How he's been doing this isn't explained, so you can come up with your own theories. X beats Sigma, and in the explosion, Sigma and Zero die, while X is gravely injured. One thing I forgot to mention last time is X4 establishes that the Dr. Light in the capsules isn't a pre-recorded message, but is Action AI who is aware of present events. That's how he's able to communicate with Zero in this game. So after the battle with Sigma, Light's AI saves X, but erases all his memories of Zero because they're too painful for X to bear. Still, the Maverick threat is ended, and X wants to create a utopia for humans and Reploids called Elysium that shows up in the Mega Man Legends games, although that doesn't really work with the timeline because the Zero series wasn't fully fleshed out yet. The good ending isn't that different. The colony is destroyed, and Zero doesn't go Maverick this time, but the Zero virus is still created at the crash site, so X and Zero have to investigate it at the end of the game. They still fight each other, but it's really contrived this time. X is concerned about how Zero interacts with the virus, and demands he go back to base. When Zero refuses, they fight. It's pretty clear this isn't actually how the characters would resolve the situation, but there needs to be a boss fight at the end of the level, so this is what happens. X and Zero then beat Sigma, with Zero being reduced to just his torso. Sigma's head fires a laser right through X's chest, and then Zero shoots Sigma. Zero and Sigma still die, and X is still saved by Dr. Light's Force Ghost, but he gets to remember Zero and keeps his Z-Saber to honor him. That's what happens when you beat the game as X. If you beat it as Zero, you get to witness his final moments before he dies, which is kinda depressing. And yeah, that's the story. It's much more involved and interesting than the previous games. It's also really dark, especially with the bad ending. I think it's a cool story for one of these games. The translation is thankfully improved too. Again, I want to point out how unfortunate it is that this story is told in PowerPoint form. There's a bunch of cool moments that could have been much better told with sprites or animation. If you're wondering why the story is so climactic in this game, that's because X5 was originally supposed to be the end of the series. It was supposed to lead into the Mega Man Zero games that Mega Man's co-creator, Keiji Inafune, was developing at the time. That's why Zero and Sigma die at the end. This obviously didn't pan out, which is ironic because there's so much finality to the game. The main example other than the story is with the continuity. This game references a lot of past X and classic series games. Like the opening sequence is a montage recapping the past X games. Tidal Whale's theme is a remix of Bubble Crab stage from X2. This Spiral Staircase and Shining Firefly stage is very similar to the one in Spiral Mushroom stage. Wait, I think that's just a lazy asset flip, never mind. What about how Spiral Pegasus was a member of Repliforce? Or really, all the final levels. Most of them directly reference past stages and bosses from the classic and X games. Like you rematch this wall monster from X1 in the second stage. This section in the last level is a recreation of Bubble Man stage from Mega Man 2. You have to dodge these lasers in the first stage, like how you did it in Quickman's level, also from Mega Man 2, you get the point. While we're on the topic of the last levels, I enjoy them. They're pretty fun, and I think the bosses are actually very well designed. The Devil Monster in particular is a pretty tough but fair fight that always keeps you on your toes. Okay, the fight between X and Zero is kind of a joke, especially in the good ending scenario, but whatever. In the third stage, if you go in as unarmored X and go into this wall, Dr. Light gives you the ultimate armor. This works the same as the fourth armor in this game, except you get unlimited Nova Strike attacks, which, trust me, is going to be very important very soon. Zero can also get an upgrade here with his black armor that gives him the damage reduction ability by default, if you didn't have the part for it. Zero getting an upgrade for once is pretty cool. Now my one complaint with the final levels is the boss rush. Oh man, what the hell happened here? Just look at this health bar. Why is it so massive? Giving these guys more health doesn't make the game harder, it just wastes my time. The ultimate armor's Giga Attack speeds this up, but man, this was a really bad design choice. Sigma is interesting in this game. His first phase is a little tricky to deal with without taking damage, but it's the second phase that usually gives me a lot of trouble. It's hard dodging his hands, and X needs to wall jump to get the height necessary to hit him. And then some of his attacks are tough to dodge, especially these stupid purple cubes that I've never been able to dodge well. It only took me 2 tries to beat him this playthrough, but I would say he's one of the harder final bosses in the series, at least with X. He's not very hard with Zero, since you can double jump at any time to hit Sigma, and you hit like a truck. But eventually Sigma goes down, and we've beaten X5. However, we're not quite done with the review yet, because I have one more topic to cover. A few years ago, fan developer Ace Diaz released a hack called the X5 Improvement Project that seeks to fix many of the issues with the original game. First and foremost, Alia can be toggled off in the menu, so you can play through the game in peace. X and Zero now always get the plus versions of upgrades and don't have to choose between two different parts, eliminating the vagueness of the original system. X and Zero also finally share heart tanks, so you can actually use both of them in the same playthrough for once. Oh my god, thank you. I've wanted this feature for so long. It feels surreal to finally play the game this way. Potentially the best change, however, is the RNG has been removed. Now the Enigma will always fail, but if you have all 4 shuttle parts, the colony will always be destroyed, so you won't be stuck in the bad ending, even if you did everything right. What a great change. The story has also been retranslated to sound better in English, and cutscenes can be skipped. X can now use armor parts before completing the full set, which is a fantastic change that, along with some retooled special weapons, drastically improves the item game. I was able to play through the game with only 2 backtracks using this order. I'm genuinely curious if it's possible to do so with less. If you've played this version and have come up with a better route, please let me know in the comments. Some stages have also been fixed. Namely, Tidal Whales is sped up by 150%, so it's less tedious, and you can now get all the items in one playthrough. Thank God. There's a lot of other changes too, but those are the most notable ones. The hack doesn't fix all my issues with the original game, but it is really good, and it's how I play X5 now. I would highly recommend this version. It's what I always wanted X5 to be, and I'm grateful it exists. I can't legally tell you how to play it, but that's what the internet is for. As for the original Mega Man X5, what a strange game. There's so many odd decisions made that detract from the experience, like the RNG endings, the terrible item game, the vague part system, or Alia, but I still do enjoy it for the core gameplay, awesome music, and Zero's campaign. If you're a fan of the series, I recommend playing it just to see if you enjoy it or not. It really is that polarizing. You know, I was actually excited for this review. Ever since Mega Man X6 came out in 2001, it's been considered one of the worst games in the series, and just a bad game in general. Growing up, I only ever heard criticism of it on the internet. But when I got around to playing it when I was 17, I surprisingly didn't agree. I had the hot take that X6 was pretty fun. Not a well-designed game at all, but enjoyable if you knew what you were doing. So I was all amped up for my review of the game, where I was going to be the guy who got to say that he liked X6. But then I played it again after 2 years, and I realized something. This game sucks! On paper, X6 plays similarly to the last game. You can still play as X and Zero. Oh yeah, Zero came back from the dead again, but don't worry, we'll talk about that later. There are still 8 Maverick stages, 16 hard tanks to grab, tons of parts to collect, a weapon tank, a pointless EX tank, some sub-tanks, you can crouch, blah blah blah, you get it. But X and Zero do play a little differently. X now has access to Zero's Z-Saber, which helps him take down some bosses. It's not great outside of that, since X isn't the most proficient with it, meaning his swings are much slower than Zero's, but it is cool he gets to use it. X also starts out with the Falcon armor. It wasn't fully repaired, so it's not as good as the one from X5. You can't fly anymore, but you do have access to an air dash, and it can charge up special weapons now. It's still solid for the dash, and especially having access to early damage reduction. Even the Giga Attack came in handy for me a couple times, which surprised me. I'm also happy to see this again, because I think it's my favorite looking armor in the series. Zero now starts out with his signature double jump, and his Z-Saber animations are all new. They look good, and I'm surprised they put in the effort to update them at all, because this game is generally very lazy. Okay, it's time to start complaining. Man, I don't even know where to start. X and Zero once again don't share heart tanks, so you want to play as them separately again, even though the rest of the game is designed for using them together. This was an issue in X5 too, but it should have been fixed in this game. Another annoying feature that hasn't been fixed is you still need all 4 parts of an armor to use it. This is a really dumb mechanic that locked me into using the default Falcon armor for most of the game. The stages in this game suck. Most of them are filled to the brim with annoying enemies or hazards, so you're constantly getting hit. Then other levels are packed with insta-death like crushing and bottomless pits that it makes playing through them really irritating. The biggest offender of this has to be Metal Shark Player's level. I don't think this stage gets enough hate. It might be worse than Tidal Whales in X5. The whole time you're dodging this trash compactor from crushing you, and it's so annoying. You're put in awkward spots without much margin for error, and if you mess up even a little, you die. Not to mention, because of the constant threat of death, the stage is very slow paced. And then one section is a boring auto-scroller for more insult to injury. Oh my god, I hate this level. At the same time, some stages have almost nothing going on. Like Infinity Maginian's level sucks because there's just a ton of nonsense happening on screen, so you're always taking damage and there's some weird mini bosses to fight. But when you actually think about it, the stage is just a line curve downwards with barely any platforming that you can clear in just 1 minute if you have the right upgrades. My favorite part of this stage is they were so lazy designing it that they put the light capsule and the heart tank just right next to each other. The only levels I enjoyed were the intro stage, the Amazon area, and the magma area when I played as Zero and had the Giga attack, because it is pretty raw, taking out a massive health bar with this technique. But that's it. You know it's a bad sign when I have to count the intro stage. The level design in this game is bad. It just doesn't flow right and honestly doesn't even feel like an official Mega Man game at times. There are quite a few sections where you can get early access to collectibles by damage boosting or just killing yourself. These games usually aren't designed like that. It's like X6 is a weird ROM hack. What makes the stages even worse is the injured Reploid mechanic. This was in X5, but I didn't talk about it there because it wasn't very relevant. In some stages, you can save some Reploids who give you an extra life and heal you up. That's all they amounted to. But X6 takes the mechanic a lot further. Too far, in fact. Every Maverick stage has 16 of these guys to rescue. And you want to save them because they hold the parts from X5 that upgrade X and Zero. They also hold half the available heart tanks in the game. The issue with this mechanic is these enemies called the Nightmares show up everywhere in the stages and can actually corrupt the Reploids if you don't rescue them in time. And if they corrupt a Reploid, they're gone forever, along with whatever part they were carrying, unless you reload your last save. This is a really stupid mechanic because the Nightmares are pretty fast, so it's likely they'll kill a few Reploids who are then dead forever. I don't know why this is so unforgiving. Just let me go back into the stage to save them. Another annoying feature is most of these Reploids don't even hold parts, but the only way to know which ones are worth saving would be to look at a guide for every stage. The Reploids without parts shouldn't even exist. They just clutter the stages and make me constantly go out of my way to save them, which makes me dislike the levels more. And there's so many of them. Maybe the constant healing is supposed to counteract all the attacks on the screen, but why would you design the game like this? The Nightmare enemies drop souls when you defeat them, and if you don't pick it up, the Nightmares respawn, so the game really encourages you to collect the souls. You can also get them from defeating the Maverick bosses. The souls are currency that let you equip more parts onto X and Zero. With 500 souls, you can equip 1 part, 900 gets you 2 parts, 1200 is 2 parts and a limited part, and that's basically all you get because to unlock 3 and 4 parts, you need 5,000 and 9,999 souls, which is just not possible without excessive grinding. And if you're grinding in X6, what are you doing? You know there are other games that exist, right? That are actually good? Basically, the part system takes a while to come online in this game, and you have less access to parts than you did in X5. So it's another sloppy implementation of a simple mechanic. And the parts just aren't as fun in this game due to the bad level design. Like Speedster is definitely worse when there are a lot of cheap shots coming at you. Some parts are still fun, such as Saber Plus that makes Zero even stronger and adds a cool light blue effect to the Z-Saber, Ultimate Buster to always fire charge shots, D-Barrier to double the length of your invincibility after getting hit, and Life Recover, which is one of those limited parts I just mentioned that basically acts as a third sub-tank, except you can only use it once per level, but you never have to refill it. This makes it the main way I heal myself in this game. You may find every Maverick stage has these blue crystals you can enter. These take you to alternate paths that contain their own bosses and collectibles, like important Reploids or the second sub-tank. You're heavily encouraged to go through these areas, but the problem is, it means you have to play through every stage twice basically if you're going for 100% or close to it. Now the alternate paths do have their own unique level design, but this is still extremely tedious because you're constantly backtracking. It's even worse than X5. The first boss in the alternate path is Nightmare Zero. He's pretty easy, and beating him is what unlocks Zero, who is technically optional, but finding these paths is very simple and sometimes just handed to you. On the other hand, the next boss, High Max, is a weird one. You fight him in the intro level, and you can't beat him there like Vile in X1. You need a Maverick special weapon to damage him after your regular attack stuns him. He's a pretty tricky fight to do early, especially since in my routing, I tend to pick up the sub-tanks near the end of the game. But he's not too bad with X. However, with Zero, it can be pretty difficult because some of his attacks are hard to dodge, and they hit hard without damage reduction. I eventually beat him, but it was near the end of the game. If you defeat him before taking down the 8 Mavericks, you unlock the final levels early, which is interesting. The same thing happened in X5 once you launch the space shuttle, by the way. The next boss is a returning Dynamo from X5. It's the exact same fight as last time, except he drops Nightmare Souls if you hit him with his weakness. The thing that sucks about Dynamo is he's the last boss in the alternate paths. So if you do all of them, you have to fight him over and over again. It's so boring to constantly replay a fight that's already recycled. And the worst part is, you have to fight him because you can't leave an alternate path unless you get a game over. And it's kinda hard to get a game over in this game, since every stage gives you constant extra lives in the form of the 16 injured Reploids. Why are lives even in this series anymore? Game overs are meaningless. I wonder if the levels could get even worse. Oh wait, they can. It's time to discuss the main gimmick of X6, the nightmare effects. Remember in X1 and X3 how beating certain Mavericks caused changes in other stages? Well, the same thing happens in X6, except this time, the changes are designed to mess with the player. For example, I beat Young Sheldon first, and that causes these silhouettes of X and Zero to attack me in Rainy Turtleoid and Blizzard Wolfang stage. These effects range from mostly harmless to extremely frustrating. Like this dark effect showed up when I did Commander Yanmark's alternate path that obscures most of the screen, and it's constantly changing what small section I'm even allowed to see with this moving pattern. It made the level absolutely miserable to go through, and at a certain point, all the remaining stages will have a nightmare effect active. The absolute worst one for me this playthrough was in Blaze Heatnix's stage. I beat Metal Shark player earlier, and that triggered an effect where these metal cubes are constantly trying to crush me. But the worst part is one of these cubes blocked off the upper pathway, which contains an armor part and the second sub-tank. I didn't know what to do and had to reset the stage. Most people, including myself, thought stages with nightmare effects show up on the stage select screen with the red shading to let you know when they're active. But even when this red effect was gone, I couldn't get rid of the cubes, so I had to look up what to do because I was stuck. It turns out the red shading actually lets you know when a new nightmare effect is occurring on the stage. Yeah, multiple nightmare effects can happen to the same level, but never at the same time. So I had to go into the Amazon area to trigger the bug nightmare effect, so I could complete Blaze Heatnix's stage. None of this is communicated to the player, which makes the mechanics so much worse because it's needlessly confusing. It's baffling they put this in the game, since it actively makes the level design worse. Another thing that's shocking is how annoying it is to find my two favorite parts, Shock Barrier and Speedster. The Shock Barrier is very important for Zero, since he takes less damage and knockback wearing it, but in order to get the part, you need to go along the alternate path in Metal Shark player stage. And after you've done that, you can't go back to the main route unless you reset to the stage select screen. And keep in mind, this is the worst level in the game. Ugh, this sucks. Why couldn't this be in any other stage? And then the Speedster part is pure RNG to get. I'm not kidding. It's in Ground Scarevich's stage, where the gimmick is it teleports you to random sections. This means you can play through the stage 3 separate times, and never end up in the part where you get Speedster. That's what happened when I played this stage in Zero's playthrough, so I just never got that upgrade with him. And the same thing happened to me with the armor part when I played it as X. Trying to get into the room with the light capsule felt harder than getting a shiny Pokemon. It took me 17 minutes to complete the alternate path and the Maverick boss, and then 20 minutes of just playing the stage over and over again until I finally lucked out and got into the room with the last piece of the blade armor. That's 37 minutes of the same stage. What the hell? Why would you design a level like this? Guess I haven't talked about X's other armors yet. The blade armor has a bigger charge shot than the Falcon armor and lets you stall in the air before performing a horizontal or vertical air dash that goes farther than before. I think you can charge the Z-Saber with it too, but I didn't know that when I recorded footage. It's a good armor, but not as great as ones we've seen before. It also has damage reduction as always. Same with the next armor dubbed the Shadow Armor. This looks really cool since X is like a ninja. Your projectiles are shaped like throwing stars, the charge shot is a strong Z-Saber slash, he can cling to walls, walk on spikes, and actually use parts with it, unlike the Gaia armor from X5. It's a fun armor set. Unfortunately, I can't use special weapons or air dash, but I still like it. If you're wondering about the Ultimate Armor and Black Zero, they're not available in the main playthrough, but you can still access them via cheat codes. This is a small complaint, but I hate how Dr. Light doesn't have a mugshot in this game, unlike every other character. It looks so wrong every time he talks, and it's just X there. Alia's back and drastically improved from the last game. Almost all of her conversations with the player show up as optional alerts you can choose to engage with or not. The few times she does interrupt you is to tell you about a weird gimmick that's coming up, which is fine. I'll give them credit, at least they fixed this. The bosses are very easy, but can be a little tricky with X. However with Zero, man, the bosses must be allergic to the Z-Saber or something. He tears through them so fast it's insane. Even the worthless Z-Buster from the last game has been buffed to do well against them too. I think fighting bosses with Zero is my favorite part of the game. It's not well designed at all, but this is X6 and pockets of fun matter. The one boss I absolutely hate though is Infinity Maginian. There's so much nonsense happening on screen, and X does a rather poor job at clearing out these bubbles. I got really lucky beating him to be honest, because I had no clue what I was doing. The special weapons and techniques are odd in this game. Most of them are pretty weak with some exceptions. Infinity Maginian's weapon is really good against these absurd mini-bosses in Blaze Heatnix's level, especially with Zero. Rainy Turtloid's weapon is also good with Zero, since it spams attacks on bosses. And then Commander Yamark's weapon is a shield that can even fire projectiles. Both X and Zero get this, and it's extremely helpful at killing nearby enemies. This might be the single most useful special weapon since Storm Eagles in X1. I use this all the time with X. So most special weapons are trash, but a few are great in this game. At this point in the series, we're done discussing optimal routing due to the insane amount of backtracking in games past X4, but I would recommend doing Young Sheldon, Commander Yamark, and Rainy Turtloid early. I feel like those stages are generally non-offensive, contain useful special weapons, or you just really don't want to do them with the bad nightmare effect active. Oh, and here's a list of where the best parts are, so pause the video if you want to look at that. To give some praise, I think the graphics are better than X5. A lot of stages with pre-rendered backgrounds look pretty good, like Rainy Turtloid and Blizzard Wolfang, and there's nothing that looks awful like Sigma in the last game. The cutscenes are sadly still told in boring PowerPoint form, but they kept the Japanese voice acting in. It's so strange. I kinda like it, but I'm sure they just forgot to take it out because this game is clearly very rushed. What ticks me off is the opening sequence is a recap of the events in X5, but it's actually animated, and it makes that game look so much cooler just by being in motion. The music is really great in this game. There are a lot of enjoyable songs that do their best to elevate a frustrating experience. I think X5's is better, but this soundtrack isn't very far behind. My favorite tracks are Commander Yamark's stage, Blaze Heatnix's level, and the J-pop ending theme Idea that sadly isn't in the X Legacy collection due to licensing issues. And that's the version I played for the review. Man, now they're taking the J-pop from me? It's time to discuss the story. X6 strangely retcons the previous game by saying that while the good ending happened, the part in the bad ending, where the Earth almost went extinct, did too. At the colony crash site, this researcher named Gate discovers this object that corrupts him, I guess. X dreams about Zero and is then called to fight a Maverick at the crash site. However, the Maverick is defeated by this mysterious nightmare that looks like Zero. This guy called Isaac, who works for Gate, along with Hymax, announces that the nightmare is a threat because it makes Reploids confused and causes them to delete themselves? Not entirely sure what that means. Anyway, he calls for volunteers and sends 8 investigators to areas to uncover the nightmare, and X goes to those places too to find out what's happening. By defeating the Nightmare Zero, X finds out the real Zero has returned, and the way he came back to life is he hit himself while he tried to repair himself. I have a statistics degree from UCLA. What the hell am I doing with my life? Keep in mind, Zero was a torso with an arm cannon the last time we saw him. This makes no sense. Okay, we need to talk about how terrible this translation is. I barely understand what's happening in this story because it's so poorly communicated in English. Like, I don't know what the nightmare is doing, how Zero is alive, or what Gate wants. He's behind the nightmare, the investigators that are hostile to X and Zero, so we have to fight them, and Hymax. But his goal is to make a nation just for Reploids? How is any of this accomplishing that? The investigators are weird too. We learned they were dead, but have been brought back to life, and I was so shocked that Alia personally killed some of them because it reads so poorly. Thankfully, after playing X6 Tweaks, a ROM hack that retranslates the story along with other things, it makes much more sense. Alia and Gate used to be colleagues, and Gate made advanced Reploids similar to X and Zero, but his colleagues were threatened by his creations and worked to destroy them, causing Gate to quit. Alia was ordered to kill some of them, so she feels a lot of guilt towards Gate, who didn't really do anything wrong. The object that corrupted Gate is a piece of Zero, and he creates the Nightmare virus, that's like the Sigma virus, but instead of making Reploids evil and rebel against humans, it instead controls them into following Gate. The point of the investigators is to lure volunteers, aka the injured Reploids, to Nightmare areas, where they'll get infected and will follow Gate until eventually he controls everyone. And it turns out the way Zero came back is his auto repair systems eventually kicked in. Oh my god, that makes so much more sense. It's an okay story when you can understand it. What sucks is most of the backstory is explained in this cutscene you can only see if you collect 3,000 Nightmare Souls before defeating Hymax, which I didn't get because I'm sadly good at this game. Thankfully, X6 Tweaks just unlocks it when you reach 3,000 souls, and it was actually translated well. By the way, I think it's hilarious how Zero's come back to life twice in this series. It's like a comic book or something. His revival is literally explained away in one line of dialogue too. What else? This guy Isaac is obsessed with Zero, even encouraging him to beat Sigma later. It's heavily implied he's another Reploid Dr. Wily, like Surge's was in X2. I think the last thing I'll say is X has very little presence in the story, even though his name's in the title. Zero is much more important to it. Even Alia gets more to do, and is almost an interesting character now that we know her backstory. That's probably a stretch. The final levels take place in Gate's lab. Gate 1 has this super annoying spike section that the shadow armor is really good for. I also noticed the stage recycles past enemies from X4, because this game was made in 1 year and the cut corners show. I do like how the lab is below the crash site from the beginning of the game. That's kind of like a full circle thing. Too bad it's an X6. Gate 2 is a much worse level. The first section is very annoying to deal with due to these stupid totems and spikes. And then we get to Hymax, where the fight is a total reversal of the battle earlier in the game. This time X really struggles if the boss gets into a pattern where he barely drops his shields. But Zero has an extremely easy time with him since Rainy Turtloid's weapon just ignores his shields and hits him. It was honestly shocking how free it was with Zero this time. It's a bad fight for being either too easy or too annoying. For some reason, beating Hymax isn't the end of the level, and you get taken to separate sections for X and Zero. X's section is based on the Inami Temple level, and is fine if you're wearing an armor with an air dash. Then Zero's is based on Metal Shark Player's stage. Rolling out all the hits, huh? This section is terrible, especially the end where you have little space to dodge the crushing, and they throw these bird enemies at you to try and sneak in a death, and guess what? They got it. Screw this section. I enjoy Zero's playthrough more overall, but this part is a real stinker. And now we finally get to Gate, who's excited about analyzing X and Zero's DNA in a non-creepy way. Sure bro, we don't judge here. Gate is a unique fight because the whole arena is over a bottomless pit, and the only way to damage him is to break these projectiles he fires that split into smaller balls of energy that hurt him. At the same time, he's flying through the screen and can sometimes just not fire off attacks or even destroy the platforms, so you want to be moving around constantly. He's one of the hardest fights in the game, and I pretty much always use a life recover or sub-tank on him, but I kinda like this fight. It's not that cheap or poorly designed, even if it can be very slow. The main problem is this whole level takes so long. It took me 20 minutes to beat it with both X and Zero, and I've played this game a lot. It probably takes twice that amount of time on your first playthrough. It really should have been 2 stages. Anyway, Gate reveals that he brought Sigma back to life. This is just a comic book at this point and not a good one. Sigma immediately kills Gate and challenges X and Zero. The last level is another boring boss rush that I made fun for myself by using this broken glitch with Zero where you spam dash and attack together to cancel the animation and just nuke bosses. I held back from using this during the regular playthrough, but boss rushes get no mercy. This is probably the most fun I had in a boss rush in these games, so that's something I guess. Final boss time. Sigma shows up like he just rolled out of bed. He wasn't fully restored, so he's not strong or very coherent right now. That's pretty clear in the first phase, which you can beat by just spamming projectiles on him in place. He starts speaking nonsense after this, because I guess we don't want our main villain to be threatening anymore? Whatever, let's just finish this crap. Sigma's last phase is weak to the Z-Saber, and it's really easy. Especially with Zero, like this damage is not okay. This is definitely the easiest final battle in the series. Sigma dies and the day is saved. In X's ending, the Maverick Hunters promise to rebuild the Earth. In Zero's ending, he seals himself away for 100 years due to people's misuse of his power like what happened in this game, setting up the Mega Man Zero games. There's technically a bad ending, but you'd have to really try to get it, since it requires never rescuing Zero, so I didn't bother. It's not that different anyway. And that was X6. Not very good, huh? Thankfully, there is some good news. I mentioned it earlier, but Ace Diaz made a hack of this game called X6 Tweaks that fixes many of its issues. It's more impressive than the X5 one in my opinion, since this game was in desperate need of fixes. You can completely disable Alien in the options menu, but what's even better is you can disable all the nightmare effects, which improves the game a lot since you don't have to worry about them ruining stages for no reason. X and Zero now share heart tanks, so you can actually use them together, which is great. I like playing through most of the game as Zero, but using X for the first Hymax fight, and to skip this annoying section of Blizzard Wolfang stage with the blade armor plus the hyper dash part. The parts system has been reworked to give you access to more parts much faster. You can use 5 when you reach 3,000 Nightmare Souls, which is so much more realistic than 9,999. The injured rep blade mechanic is also much better here. All the rep blades that didn't give out parts have been removed, so now the stages are less cluttered, and you know the ones you rescue are actually useful. And they don't give out extra lives or heal you anymore, the latter of which slow down the pacing, with time constantly stopping during a heal. Game overs now send you back to the beginning of stages, which I personally don't love, since I find lives an antiquated game mechanic. On the bright side, the EX tank is finally useful. You can also quit out of stages at any time, so you don't have to rematch Dynamo 6 times in the alternate paths. Thank God. Back to the Reploids, they'll reappear if you fail to save them, which I really appreciate. And X can use individual pieces of the armor sets, so that's really cool. Some bad level design has been changed too, although most of it is the same sadly. A personal victory for me is Dr. Light finally has a mugshot in dialogue now. Look at how blue my man is. And lastly, as aforementioned, the story has been retranslated to be much more coherent. Hell, even the font is much better. X6 was pretty broken before, and there still are a lot of frustrating aspects, like the levels not being well designed, but this hack fixes so many of the problems with the original game. It really improved the experience for me. I played a lot more of it than I intended to, because I was actually having a good time, which I cannot say about the original. I would recommend this version. There still is a lot of jank, but it's a very fun time if you enjoy the X series. Since I found out about this version in 2023, it's been how I replay this game. I find it funny how when it came time to review X6, I had such an awful experience with the original game. It's like X6 is immune to praise. It's just a mess that screams cash grab and everything besides the presentation. The game manages to be extremely frustrating and tedious due to some poorly thought out mechanics and level design. I used to think this game couldn't be bad because it's built off the solid X4 engine. The controls are still great, so it has to be fun, right? No, not when everything else doesn't work. This is easily the worst game so far. I would not recommend it. I don't hate it, but I hope to never play it again aside from the Tweaks version. Mega Man X7. This is the game that many consider to be the worst in the X series. I've only played it a few times, and I've never liked it. So going into this review, I did not have high hopes. But I was genuinely shocked at how awful it was. There's just so much wrong with it that describing it in words feels impossible. But I'm gonna try anyway. X7 is the first game in the series on the PS2, and with the new console, Capcom decided to change a lot about the gameplay. First off, the game is 3D. This means you have a lot more space to move around in, you can rotate the camera around sometimes, and the devs added a lock-on system, so it's easier to hit enemies. Now the whole game doesn't play like this. I would say half the game is 3D, and the other half is 2.5D. Another change is a new character has been added. His name's Axel. He fights with pistols that can't be charged like X's Buster. However, he can hover in the air for a few seconds, which helps him with platforming. He also has this ability called the copy shot that lets him transform into enemies if he kills them with certain bullets. Unlike the previous games, the Maverick Hunters now tackle stages in a team of 2 with the partner mechanic. You can switch between the 2 characters at any time, and they each have their own separate health bar, which is nice. But keep in mind, if you die with just one of them, you lose a life, so watch out. Before I really dive into the rest of the gameplay, I want to start out with the positives. This won't take very long. The music is still really good. It's not the most memorable soundtrack, or as great as some of the other games, but I enjoy it. My favorite songs are the boss theme and the second stage select theme. The controls are pretty good. It doesn't feel as tight as the previous games, but I still always felt like I was in complete control of my characters. The part system is much clearer than X5 and X6, and the game even explains how it works to you. Every stage has 2 power-up chips that can strengthen your characters in a skill tree system. You're not held back by the boss level or an absurd amount of nightmare souls anymore. When you die, the music no longer resets, which I think is a nice touch. Another good change is these orange orbs fully heal one character and completely refill a sub-tank, so grinding for them is easy in this game. The special weapons are surprisingly good. There are definitely some stinkers like the Gaia Shield that supposedly reflects enemy projectiles, but never does. However, I thought most were useful, like the Wing Cutter and Snipe Missile. The Splash Laser is probably the best one, since it's really powerful for some reason. But the best thing about the special weapons is some of them unlock additional weapons for Zero and Axel that replace their default attacks. Near the end of the game, I realized this weapon for Axel, called the G-Launcher from Vanishing Gungaroo, is kinda insane because one shot does the same damage as a charge shot from X, but you can quickly fire multiple in a row. This comes in clutch on boss fights to do massive damage. It became the main way I fought with Axel. I didn't really use Zero's techniques, so I can't comment on them. But Axel and X share special weapons, and I liked what they got to use. And in terms of positives, that's where it ends. That's everything I liked in this game. And now, time to discuss the rest. I'm gonna need some medication when this is over. The most important mechanic in X7 are the missing Reploids. Like the last game, there are 16 of them in every stage, with 1 holding a heart tank and 2 holding the power-up chips. And these chips are extremely valuable because all 3 characters are weak at first. But the main reason you want the Reploids is to unlock X. You heard me right. For story reasons I'll discuss later, X is not playable at default until you beat all 8 Mavericks, which I would not recommend, or save 64 Reploids. If you want him as soon as possible, that means you need to find all the Reploids in 4 of the 8 Maverick stages. And trust me, you want him very quickly because he's easily the best character in the game. The reason he's so good is his charge shot is extremely powerful and basically beats all the bosses. It does take a longer amount of time to fully charge, but it's still great. And if you max out the speed section in the skill tree, you can even speed up the charge time to fix this issue. Also, X has the best defense in the game. This time the 50% damage reduction from his armor stacks with the shock absorber upgrade every character can get, so it's reduced by a whopping 75%. That is crazy. By the way, when you get the power-up chips in this game, you have to use them as soon as you clear a stage, so the later you unlock X, the less you'll be able to upgrade him. That's another reason why the first half of the game should be all about getting every single Reploid in the stages, so you can power up X and whoever will be teaming with him. The issue with looking for Reploids is stages in X7 are bigger than any of the previous games, particularly the 3D sections. This means the Reploids can be hard to find. Much harder than in X6, where most were barely hidden. What makes things worse is the Reploids in some of the enemies only appear when you get close to them. I suspect this is because the game can't handle loading them in ahead of time, but that's just a guess. Either way, in every level, I'm frantically looking everywhere on screen until these guys show up because you need them for everything. It's exhausting, and it's what I spent most of the game doing. I barely even registered looking for heart and sub-tanks because the Reploids are just more important, and you need to get so many of them. Eventually it hit me that X7 is like a collectathon. Believe me, I love those kind of games. The first Jak and Daxter is in my top 10 games of all time, but they suck when the collecting is tedious. And Mega Man X is not primarily about collecting things. It's about fast-paced platforming and action, which X7 fails at because the game is very slow-paced when you're in large 3D spaces looking for Reploids the whole time. Most stages in this game took me 15 to 20 minutes, which is just too long, especially when what I'm doing is not very interesting. Not to mention, the menus take forever in this game. Alia slowly goes through every Reploid you saved one at a time, like it's a big deal, and she reminds you each and every time that the chips upgrade your characters. I know chips help my characters, Alia. X has 7 of them. You also can't skip the in-game cutscenes, which waste my time when I game over on a boss and have to rewatch the intro cutscene. You know what the funny thing about the Reploid mechanic is? I haven't even mentioned the worst part yet. Remember in X6 how the nightmares could kill Reploids, and it was really frustrating because they were too fast and the deaths were permanent? Well, in X7, the nightmares are literally gone, but metaphorically stronger than ever, because now every enemy can kill the Reploids in one hit. It is so infuriating to play a stage for 14 minutes, and at the end of the level, a Reploid and enemy teleport in together, and the Reploid dies in 1 second. Some of these guys are so hard to keep alive, and it's a big reason why I spend every stage obsessing over the Reploids, because they are in danger to everything. At least in X6, most of the time they were safe. Everything about the Reploids is horrible, and the whole game is designed around saving them. This sucks so much. I said most of what I wanted to with X already. He's the best character, especially when you upgrade him. In this game, there's thankfully only one armor set to get. It's called the Glide Armor, and most of its abilities are unremarkable. It has a Giga attack that's okay, and one upgrade lets you attract health and weapon drops. Cool I guess? But the damage reduction is fantastic, and I thought the new glide feature was awesome. It lasts until you land, and came in handy for a lot of platforming sections. It's kinda a mixed armor set, but I'll say it's good overall. What sucks is Axel and Zero can no longer pick up the armor parts for X, so you probably need to backtrack with him to complete the set. But hey, at least there's less backtracking in this game than X5 and X6. Now let's go over Zero. Right from the intro stage, I knew I hated playing as him in this game. His Z-Saber swings feel so laggy and kinda weak without upgrades. Then in 3D sections, it's awkward playing as him because he has to fight up close, unlike the other characters who can fight the enemies from a distance and can even lock onto them. Some enemies aren't even designed to be fought with Zero because of his worse range. He feels really clunky, so I barely used him. I feel like most people play this game with X and Zero as the main team, but I liked Axel much more. Okay, he feels awful at first because you have to button mash his shots at default. However, in the settings, you can set it to auto-fire, which makes him much more enjoyable, especially when you get some upgrades for him. I wish he had the auto-fire at default because you can't use this feature with X and still fire off charge shots. I found platforming comfortable with Axel's hover, and I thought his attacks had good damage, especially when I learned about the G launcher. The biggest problem with Axel is his copy ability. It takes forever to kill an enemy with it, and all of the ones you get to use are so slow. You need to use this ability to get some Reploids in a few of the stages, and it's another reason why I chose Axel over Zero. You know what else is annoying? Only the character who saves the Reploid holding the heart tank, or gets the heart tank in the stage, receives a health buff. And since one character is never on the two-person team, it's a waste to collect Reploids or spend upgrade chips with them. This meant I barely used Zero in the first half of the game, even though he was always on my team. Great partner mechanic, guys. How are we 3 games in, and these characters still aren't sharing health upgrades with each other? The number of heart tanks has increased again to 24. Whichever character lands the final blow on a Maverick gets 1. So Zero got some health upgrades because of this. Other than that though, the collectibles are all the same as before. Now I want to describe my playthrough with you guys, and how this game broke my will. I started with Tornado Tanyan because I remember I used to tackle him first. His stage is just boring. You go right and do some platforming until the level ends, but at least the Reploids are in plain sight. This mini-boss took forever though, and so did the actual boss. He has so much health and is invincible for most of the fight, and this is where the 3D first became an issue for me. Most of the 3D sections have fixed camera angles, but this area lets you move the camera left and right. The camera functions are assigned to buttons, not the second analog stick, which feels antiquated for a game in 2003. I had to rotate the camera constantly in this battle, and it was so awkward. I have a really small complaint here. I hate how the boss health bars look in this game. They should look better. Next up is Ride Borsky. This is a ride chaser stage, so you already know it's going to be bad. Once again, you can only move forward, but the ride chaser now moves slowly because the goal of the level is to collect even more things than usual. You need to disarm 20 bombs before the timer hits 0, but you also need to save the Reploids. The problem is the Reploids and enemies look identical, so it's really easy to mix them up. And the game labels the Reploids and bombs for you, but it makes the screen a mess to look at. The stage is boring, but it didn't annoy me until this massive jump that intentionally makes it hard to grab the bombs and Reploid, meaning I had to loop back to save them. That really ticked me off, but at least this is the shortest stage in the game. Third, I did Snipe Anteater. The level is massive because to get everything, you need to go through it once normally, and then go through it upside down, both of which are blocked off by walls, so it kinda becomes a maze. As you can guess, this made finding all the Reploids take even longer. And using Axel's copy shot here was miserable, with the enemies having armor in the front. I regret doing this stage so early, because the boss is tough without X or his weakness. Sometimes you can't hit him due to his placement, he has too much invincibility, and he spawns 6 sniper devices that all attack you. At this point I realized something. I don't like the stages, but the game so far is kinda fine. It's not fun, but it's just mediocre, which is more than I expected. I even wondered if I was gonna have to retract saying this game was worse than X6. But then everything got so much worse. The next stage is Soldier Stone Kong, which most people do first because the boss is a joke. But I never do because I hate this level. I think the enemies are annoying, it took me forever to get the copy shot to work, I hate finding Reploids here, and it looks so ugly with the awful textures everywhere. I don't know why the game looks this bad. It's a PS2 game from 2003. Other games from this year look much better, and even have more motion and cutscenes, and less blocky character models. At least the cutscenes look better than X5 and X6. The beginning and end of the game even have FMVs. Back to the stage, it's all in 2D, and what's odd about these sections is there's still a lock-on here, meaning you don't have to aim at the enemies, unlike the previous games. This makes the combat feel dumbed down, because now killing enemies amounts to pressing the square button, and that's it. I don't know why the lock-on wasn't disabled for these parts. Anyway, I beat Stone Kong and finally unlocked X. I backtracked for his armor parts, which thankfully can be used immediately when you get them, and then I took on Wing Krorang. This level sucks. The beginning section has you platforming on these planes looking for Reploids, and it takes so long. And one of the planes kills you if you stay on it long enough to grab the heart tank. What terrible game design is this? And every time you die, you need to watch your characters flying on their plane, which takes 15 seconds. And I had to intentionally game over here because I didn't know if I grabbed the heart tank, and I figured this was faster than going on the suicide plane again. You see, aside from the Reploids, collectibles in this game don't have a sound effect when you grab them for some reason. So multiple times I grabbed a heart tank and didn't even realize it. How do you mess this up? Every other game did this correctly. Splash Warfly was next, and his stage has some truly terrible fixed camera angles with this mini-boss. Otherwise, the stage was fine for now, but believe me, I'll have more to say about it soon. The boss is really hard without weaknesses, by the way. And I hate how much health these guys have. All the boss fights are so much longer than before. Flame Heinard is hands down the worst level in the game. It starts off fine, but then you get to this area where you need to save the Reploids quickly, or else these bombs will explode and kill them. And it is so hard to save all of them in time with these rotating lasers to dodge. I had to reset this stage twice, and on my third attempt, another Reploid died, so I just stopped caring and hoped he wasn't carrying a part I needed. I hate this section so much. You then get taken to a massive 3D area that took me 10 minutes to fully explore and was also really frustrating. But after 22 minutes, I finally arrived at the boss, and I'll let him introduce himself because he's a better talker than I am.
Burn! Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground!
Please kill me. He screams like this the entire fight, and the battle's already so frustrating since it's really hard to dodge all the attacks on screen. I haven't played this game since 2020 or maybe 2018. I remember this boss was bad, but I was not prepared for it to be this terrible. My jaw literally dropped because how did no one see how horrible this battle is? There's no way they playtested this. I wasn't even sure how to beat him until I realized you can lock him into only firing projectiles at you if you're near the front of the vehicle. But wow, this whole level is god-awful. Last is Vanishing Gungaroo, which is the ride armor stage. The first section has some horrendous fixed camera angles. Can you tell I don't like the 3D in this game? The ride armor is also so clunky and slow here. It sucks. The next sections are better with this spider ride armor, but it still feels really awkward to use. Anyway, I grabbed my first sub-tank here, and the boss fight takes an eternity since he has 2 phases, constantly dodges your attacks, and way too much health. But we're finally done with all the Maverick stages now. They sucked and only got worse as the game went on. Now we can move on to the final stages, right? Well, I can't, because I'm still missing the second sub-tank. I had no idea where it was, so I had to search through half the stages. I spent 40 minutes doing this, but I had no success, so I threw in the towel and looked it up. As it turns out, the sub-tank is in the first level I searched, Splash Warflies. I had already found the heart tank that was hidden by the camera angle, but the sub-tank was hidden the same way. The only method to find this is if you hug the boxes in this stage to grab the item because it's out of view. I was already hating the game at this point, but this made me upset. I miss when exploration actually meant exploring the stages instead of just touching every pixel on screen. What's ironic is I never even used the second sub-tank. The story in this game sucks too. X decides after 6 games of fighting Mavericks that it's pointless and retires. With the Maverick Hunters weakened in X's absence, a group of bounty hunters called Red Alert rise up. The group is named after their leader Red. Axel is a member but quits when they start hurting innocent people. Zero encounters Axel as he's running away and arrests him, but Red wants him back because of his useful copy ability. Red, trust me, it's not that great. Axel and Zero must then fight against Red Alert and its members, while X refuses to fight in another conflict. We find out later in the story, the reason Red Alert changed is Sigma corrupted the group. Did anyone else always think about Sigma from these games when they did Infinite Series and BC Calculus? Anyone watching take that class in high school? Leave a comment if you took BC Calculus, I'm curious. The main issue with this story is X himself. It's always been in his character to hate fighting, and I understand why he's sick of all these conflicts. However, X never comes up with an alternative because one doesn't exist in this story. Red and Sigma are not the kind of people you can negotiate with. So in this game, X is just chilling at the hunter base saying, "Why do Reploids need to fight each other, bro?" And it makes him look really naive and unlikable. Especially when he regrets fighting Sigma in the past. Like, this guy has tried to destroy the planet multiple times. X made the right choice when he fought him. He's also indirectly responsible for Red Alert's rise in the first place. It's an extremely dumb premise that only exists so the player's forced to use Axel. What makes it worse is X's voice actor makes him sound really whiny. Yep, voice acting is back in English and it is quite bad. Obviously the worst is whoever voices Flame Hyanard, but everyone sounds miscast for their roles. Mainly Zero and Cygnus. Guess I never mentioned this guy before. Cygnus was introduced in X5 and is just the leader of the Maverick Hunters. Back to the voice acting, it sucks and not even in a so bad it's good way like X4. It's just not good.
Okay, do as you please.
To finish things, I've got to do it. To finish this once and for all.
Yeah, let's show that Red Alert how it's done.
One topic many people debate is what game is worse between X6 and X7. Both are awful, but for different reasons. X6 is a more frustrating game due to the nightmare effects, constant backtracking, and horrible stages. X7 is more tedious due to the constant collecting, extremely slow pacing, bad 3D sections, and dull combat. In my opinion, X7 is worse because when you know what you're doing, you can kinda play around the bad mechanics in X6 and make the experience feel closer to a good X game. X6 is also a more exciting game to play because of its faster pacing, and it doesn't feel clunky. It's just bad as opposed to being boring and bad. I can definitely understand why someone would dislike X6 more though. I think if you're going in completely blind, X6 is probably a worse game due to having more unexplained mechanics and unfair situations. In this scenario, X7 is more playable, but you're still going to be miserable and bored. We're now at my favorite section of the review, the endgame. Elia finds where Red is hiding, and we go to Palace Road. The stage is an auto-scroller where you're being chased by an enemy so fast, I literally outspeed him while walking. Wow. This level is so boring and long. Next up is the final stage, Crimson Palace. It suffers from the same problems as Gate 2, where it should have been 2 stages because it takes forever. You fight Red here, and it's not very hard, but it's another fight where you have to constantly rotate the camera around, which is annoying. Anyway, Red commits suicide for some reason, and then we're given 2 paths to choose from. The ride armor one on the right is much faster, so I'd recommend that. We arrive at the boss rush, which took me 20 minutes in this game because of how slow all the fights are. That's literally double the amount of time it took me in X4 for reference. By the time I finish, I've been playing this stage for 40 minutes. What a nightmare. The group confronts Sigma, and we get some meta commentary.
You never give up, do you? Even when we break you down to scraps, you always come back.
That's right, folks. I'll do it again and again. I will make X and Zero mine.
2 questions here. Why does Sigma sound like Beetlejuice? And at what point did this guy become a complete joke? Sigma's first phase was so dull that I was spacing out during it. I was bored during the final boss fight. How does that even happen? Now we get to the last phase, which is in 3D. You get a checkpoint before this phase, so you can fight him with full health. It's pretty easy. All I do is camp in this area to dodge his attacks, and spam the charge shot on him. The only thing you really have to watch out for is this punch attack. Sigma dies again, and you get a different ending depending on who dealt the final blow. Zero has a dream of X going Maverick that teases the Mega Man Zero series for the 2nd game in a row, and X and Axel basically have the same ending, where Axel wants to be a Maverick Hunter, but X doesn't approve. X is such an asshole in this game. After beating Sigma, you can play New Game Plus, where you keep all the upgrades except the heart tanks. This lets you fully max out the skill trees for your characters. This is a nice feature because it adds replayability, but sadly it's in X7, which almost no one wants to replay. And that's it. I've covered all the content in the game, but we're not done yet. Last year a ROM hack was released called X7 Ends Edition. I'll link the creator in the description because I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Like the other hacks I've covered, this fixes a lot of issues with the original game. The first one I noticed is you can fast forward in-game cutscenes by pressing the start button, which is really helpful. The voice acting is also not an issue anymore because it's in Japanese and you can't change it back to English. The developer must have hated the voice acting. On the bright side, Flame Heinard is no longer screaming at me every microsecond, so I can actually fight him without turning down the sound. Another big change is Zero has been buffed. His Z-Saber swings are much less laggy than before, and it makes him feel closer to how he played in the PS1 games. I used him over Axel as the second teammate, and he was pretty good, especially on boss fights. Although Axel is still solid, and his copy shot has been buffed to be faster. You still have to unlock X, but the requirements have been cut in half to needing just 32 Reploids or all the Reploids in 2 stages. This is pretty easy because I just did Ride Borsky and Tornado Tanyan first. 2 stages where the Reploids are all in plain sight. And boom, I'd X already. I don't have to play through half the game to get the best character anymore. This also removes backtracking for his light capsules. The missing Reploid mechanic has been improved in other ways as well. They die to enemies in 3 hits now, which is so much more forgiving and meant I wasn't terrified of losing them to unfair level design. None of them died this playthrough, not even in Flame Heinard's level. The heart tanks the Mavericks gave you when you defeated them have been removed, but now every character shares the health upgrades. So I can save the Reploids with anyone now, and actually use both characters on the team. The heart tanks and other collectibles have sound effects, so thankfully I now know when they've been collected. One of the best changes is some awful camera angles have been fixed, like this part in Splash Warfly stage. I think the camera movement is also faster in this version, so fights like Red are more comfortable. That's not the only thing that's faster. The menus are sped up, with all the Reploids you saved appearing almost instantly on screen, and upgrading your characters is a lot quicker. I messed up my skill tree for X a bit in the original game by missing out on the faster charge speed upgrade, but this time around I didn't make the same mistake. And it made the game more enjoyable, since I can now quickly fire off my charge shots. The Palace Road stage is an actual chase now, with the level being sped up, so I don't fall asleep and can beat it quicker. The last big change is the bosses have been nerfed. Like Splash Warfly does less damage, Snipe Anteater has less annoying sniper devices to hit you with, and reduced invincibility, and Vanishing Gungaru's massive health bar has been cut down. Even Sigma got nerfed. He has less health than before, and was super easy with my faster charge shot. I didn't even use a sub-tank on him. These are all great changes, but you're probably wondering if they make X7 a good game. I'd say they make it more enjoyable, but it's still a dull collectathon with annoying stages, bad camera angles, boring combat, and slow pacing. The changes definitely help, but X7's core game design is inherently not very fun. I'd say I had an awful time playing the original version and an okay time with Ends Edition. It's easily the best way to play X7, but I can't say it's a good game. Still, I'm really grateful this exists, and I definitely will play it again, instead of skipping over X7 like I've done for years now. Returning to the original X7, I hated this game. I got so frustrated and bored playing it that I was honestly confused how the game turned out so poorly. I now remember why I haven't touched this game in years. If you enjoy it, more power to you. I wish I could see it through your eyes. This is the worst X game and the worst main series Mega Man game in my opinion. I'd skip this one if I were you. Mega Man X8 is a very interesting game to me. When I was younger, I really enjoyed it because it brings unique mechanics to this series that are pretty fun. It also has a certain mystique, since it's the last game in the series. There's just something uniquely compelling about finales because they tie up long-running stories. However, in the past few years, my opinion of X8 has changed. I just view the game as okay now. It does a lot right, but it makes too many mistakes for me to like it. Let me explain in the final review of the Mega Man X Retrospective. X8 goes back to the core gameplay being 2D. I think we can all agree this is for the best after X7. Like that game, X, Axel, and Zero are the playable characters in a team of 2 for each level, but the partner mechanic has been improved. If one of the teammates takes damage, some of their health loss is shaded red. If you switch to the other character for a bit, the red health eventually restores itself, which gives you a good reason to use both characters. There's also this meter in the top left of the screen called the attack gauge. It increases by hitting enemies, and when it's filled up, you can unleash a double attack, where both characters fight together for massive damage, which helps with the boss fights. Some enemies can trap the player, but if you switch to your partner, that instantly frees you from those attacks. And if you die to an enemy as one character, you don't lose a life this time. Instead, the other character keeps playing and can even restore their partner by filling up the attack gauge. As you can see, the partner mechanic is more developed this time, and it makes the gameplay more interesting. This is the best innovation to the series since X4 added Zero. Another change is to the enemies themselves. Some of them have shields that make them invulnerable to normal attacks. This goes for certain boss fights too. Each character is uniquely equipped to break the shields, with Zero's last hit of the Z-Saber combo, X's charge shot, and Axel's bullets if fired for long enough. The controls are still great. Everyone feels smooth to play as, and movement has been sped up, which makes the game more fast-paced. X plays how you would expect him to, except his armor system has been changed again. Like X5 and X6, there's 2 separate armor sets, the Hermes armor and the Icarus armor, meaning you need to grab 8 light capsules again. But unlike those games, you can now use any part before completing the set, and you can even choose which individual parts X gets to use, allowing for more variety. You do get exclusive special moves if you wear the full sets though. The Icarus armor gets the Giga attack, and the Hermes armor gets the X Drive ability that buffs X's stats until the meter runs out. I was never a big fan of these, and I think it's better to mix and match the parts. The best one is definitely the Icarus Buster parts that power up the X Buster and let you fire off a giant laser. This looks awesome, but the laser actually isn't that strong, aside from breaking shields. And it's very laggy. The main benefit to these parts is it makes the non-fully charged shot, and even the basic pellets, really powerful. Most enemies and bosses get nuked by this one upgrade. My favorite combination of parts for X are the Hermes head parts for faster X Buster charging, the Icarus body parts to cut my damage taken in half, the Icarus Buster parts for the stronger blasts, and the Hermes foot parts for faster speed and an invincible dash. This is a great armor system. My only complaint is you basically need to bring X to every level since the other characters still can't grab his upgrades. This isn't too bad because he's once again the best character, but that would have been a nice quality of life change. X's special weapons are not great though. Most of them are not satisfying to use and are weaker than the Icarus Buster parts. I barely touch these. Zero feels much better to play as than X7. His attacks have less lag, and he can once again get weapons. I didn't find much use for these, with one notable exception. The D-Glaive is a giant spear that basically lets Zero hit everything on the screen. This weapon is insane, especially when combined with the spinning technique you get from Dark Mantis. He is just a constant hitbox, it is wild. His other techniques are fine too, but come on, it's hard not to just use this one. Zero's double jump is also better utilized in this game for grabbing collectibles. Despite the buffs, I still prefer Axel over Zero in this game. He can now fire bullets in any direction and continually shoot them if you hold down the square button. No need to enable that in the options menu like X7. The copy shot is now much faster, so it's easier to use when you need it for collectibles. Axel's special weapons are good too. Because he constantly fires shots, he has unlimited ammo for these. My favorites are the Ice Gatling gun that fires faster shots, and the Ray gun, which is a lifesaver when you're grinding and is helpful for the final boss. Plus his hover is great for the challenging platforming sequences. I really like using Axel. The devs did a good job improving on his gameplay from X7, and the result is a cool character who feels fresh. The boss fights are solid in this game. They feel weird at first, since they have more invincibility than usual, but they're well-designed fights. When their health gets low, they unleash their overdrive attacks. These do more damage than their regular attacks, and the bosses are completely invulnerable during them, so watch out. What I like about these battles is you're constantly encouraged to swap characters when you take damage, and you want to keep both characters alive because the double attack is very useful since it takes out a sizable chunk of their health bar. There's a bit more strategy in these boss fights than usual. So far in this review, I've been very positive because X8 does a lot right, but it sadly does a lot wrong as well. A currency system has been added where you collect medals and stages and use them to buy items in the shop called the R&D lab. Aside from the light capsules, every upgrade in the game is in this shop, most notably the health upgrades. And those are very important in this game because if you're playing on hard mode, all 3 characters are made of paper at first. I haven't talked about hard modes much in these reviews because I always play these games on normal mode. But in X8, the final level changes depending on what difficulty you select, so I always play this game on hard. The issue with the shop is most of the upgrades are pretty expensive. This means you have to grind for medals, which sucks. The best way to play this game is choose Earthrock Trilobite first. The stage opens with you being slowly chased by a robot, but after damaging it, now you have to chase the robot. If you shoot him with Axel's bullets, he will drop a ton of medals you can use in the shop to quickly upgrade health for your characters. The problem is this gets boring fast, and I had to do it multiple times. The worst instance was at the end of the game, where the damage reduction upgrades for Axel that I needed cost a ludicrous amount, even with the discount chip. Eventually when grinding here, you'll run out of lives and have to go back to the shop to buy more. X8 brings back game overs, returning you to the start of the level. The way this works is your lives are called retry chips that you have to buy in the shop, and in hard mode, you only get 3 of these, and there's no EX tank in this game. Anyway, when you come back to grind in this level, you have to replay the first long chase sequence again. Isn't that fun? It took me 5 hours to beat this game, and I grinded in this one stage for roughly 30 minutes. That means I spent 10% of my playtime just doing this. Items should have been much less expensive in my opinion, and some shouldn't cost medals at all. Some items like the life ups are included in the default shop, but most of them require rare medals. These are the main collectibles in X8. You find them in the stages, and then when you go to the R&D lab, now Zero can buy his fan weapon if you have enough medals to purchase it. I missed when collecting an item immediately gave it to me. Now I have to collect it, grind a lot of medals, and then purchase it. It's not fun, and it overcomplicates the gameplay. To be fair, the shop system isn't all bad. I like most of the upgrades, such as the 2 life bottles you can buy default that are basically 1 sub-tank and can later be upgraded to 2 life tanks. Another good one is the prickle barrier that stops spikes from killing you but leaves you with only 1 health point left. I think the shop mechanic could have been good with a few tweaks. Unfortunately, that isn't my only issue with X8. The levels in this game kinda suck. Literally every stage has a gimmick. Like Troya Base has a series of dull combat challenges that are ranked based on how fast you beat them, Inferno has 3 boring auto-scrolling sections, and then there are the 2 vehicle stages. Both of these are the only parts of the game in 3D, and they're so annoying. In Dynasty, you chase after the boss and have to shoot him down, but it's so hard to hit him, especially with all the obstacles in the way. And the controls aren't customizable here. I have to dash with the circle button, even though I have my dash in regular gameplay set to L1. Luckily I beat this on my first try this playthrough, but I do not like this stage at all. Yet, I still like it more than Central White. The controls in this level are better, but the stage drags on for way too long. And they make you fight the same mini-boss twice to pad it out. I'd be fine with the gimmicky stages if they were fun, but almost none of them are. The only exception is Pitch Black. The gimmick here is the lights are out, which gives the stage some atmosphere. I also enjoyed the obstacle of dodging these searchlights, or else enemies will appear and attack you. It's a good stage. I kinda liked Primrose too, which is a compliment, because I usually don't enjoy anti-gravity stages. But it's a bit too spike happy for me to give it a thumbs up. And this room where you have to dodge crushing blocks with spikes on them is horrible. I'm confused why the developers had to put a gimmick in every level. What's even weirder is in some stages, you're locked in a room with weak enemies you have to kill for 30 seconds. It's not hard or interesting in the slightest. I know they're trying to pad out the levels, but this is so lazy. I'm gonna stress that I don't hate these stages, but they're not fun, and some of them get on my nerves, mainly when it comes to the item game. X8 is yet another game with a backtracking problem if you want to collect most or all the rare medals. Take for example Troya Base. After you complete the challenges in the stage, you get a rare medal if you got the highest rank on all of them. Plus a battle with Cutman from Mega Man 1 is unlocked. Makes sense, right? But you also get a rare medal if you didn't get the highest rank on at least one of the challenges. So if you want to complete the stage, you need to play it twice. One time playing very well, and the other time not playing well. Why not just give you both rare medals if you got the highest rank on all of the challenges? Instead you're rewarded for playing bad. What a dumb reason to replay a stage. Inferno has a similar issue. All 3 characters are needed to get upgrades here. Axel's copy ability gets him into this room with a rare medal, X opens the light capsule containing the Hermes foot parts, and Zero breaks this floor with his hammer weapon so he can obtain a rare medal. Of course you can only have 2 characters in a team, so you have to backtrack to 100% this stage. Another complaint I have is to get many rare medals, you need specific upgrades. For instance, if you want to 100% Pitch Black without backtracking, you first need to bring Axel, who can get into the room with this generator thanks to his copy ability. Then you need to have beaten Dynasty to power up the generator in the level, which somehow lowers some platforms. Next you need Earthrock Trilobite's weapon to get this rare medal. After that, you need the Icarus foot parts from Bamboo Pandemonium stage, so X can jump onto this platform and reach the last rare medal. Finally, X can grab the Hermes body parts. To complete the level in one go, you needed to have beat 2 Mavericks and gotten X's foot parts in a 3rd Maverick stage. And Pitch Black is the level you want to do early because it has the life tank, the deglaive, and Zero's spinning technique. So the routing also isn't very flexible in X8. This is what I mean when I say this game is just fine. It has a lot of great features, but it also has glaring issues that stop me from having much fun. Some new characters have been added to the Maverick Hunter team. Meet Lair and Pallet. These 2 are navigators along with Alia, and you can choose which one of the 3 you want guiding you through stages. Lair gives you advice on boss fights, Pallet hints at where collectibles are, and Alia can do both, but is less detailed. Pallet is definitely the most useful of the 3, since some collectibles are hidden in weird places. I think this is a fine system, and it's not forced on you, because you can choose to go through stages with no navigator if you want. The last thing about the gameplay to mention is Vile has returned, and he shows up a few times to fight you. The first time is always after you beat 2 Mavericks, so here's a tip. Do Primrose 3rd, so you fight Vile here, because the battle skips over this terrible death trap room. The graphics are a step up from X7. The character models look better, and so do the textures, although there still are a lot of ugly ones in this game. These later X games had to have smaller budgets, right? The music in this game is phenomenal. I noticed there's more emphasis on guitars, which I think was a great choice. Almost every song is good, and it's hard to choose my favorites. I really like the Jacob Elevator theme, Booster Forest song when you're in the ride armor, and the J-Rock theme Wild Fang. I listened to this song so much in high school. It's so good. I like the soundtrack as much as X1 and X5. The music in the X series definitely ends on a high note. It feels crazy to say, but the voice acting in this game is solid. For the first time, every character sounds appropriate, and it actually let me focus on what was going on in the plot, besides how terrible all the line deliveries are. The guy who voices Vile does the best job in my opinion. He really sells how evil the character is.
The world as you know it, Mavericks, kiss it all goodbye. Mayhem, doom, and destruction. That's what we were built for.
Vile's just a pro hater in the same league as Sephiroth, the Green Goblin, and Newman. You know, the big 3. The story of X8 is after all the Reploid rebellions, the humans have decided to move to the moon via the Jacob Project and Orbital Elevator. New generation Reploids are essential in this effort, with each of them containing copy chips that let them transform into other Reploids like Sigma. The director of the project is this person called Lumine, who's introduced to us smiling while surrounded by Sigma copies with flames behind him. I wonder if this guy is evil. Nah, no way. In the intro level, Vile kidnaps Lumine, and then a couple new generation Reploids go Maverick, so it's up to the hunters to fight them and rescue Lumine. Along the way, we learn these Reploids shouldn't have been able to go Maverick because they're immune to all viruses. We also learn that Axel is a prototype for the new generation Reploids, which is why they both have the copy ability. That's the basic premise of the story. I'm happy this game makes X likable again. He's proactive in fighting the Mavericks this time, and even when he complains about the war, he quickly realizes that the way to end it is to fight instead of just whining. God, X7's story was so bad. Zero also gets some decent scenes where he talks about how it bothers him that Sigma used his DNA to create the Sigma virus. X8 has some direct references to the poem Paradise Lost, which is about the fall of man in the time of Adam and Eve. I've never read it myself, but I just wanted to point that out. It's time for the endgame, the last levels in the series. The Maverick Hunters realize earlier than usual Sigma is behind this plan, and he reveals himself once all 8 Mavericks are beaten. He's on the moon, and the heroes need to take the Jacob elevator to reach him. This stage is potentially the most gimmicky in the whole game, and that's saying a lot. The level's an auto-scroller, where you ride up the elevator and kill enemies. That is all you do for 4 minutes. It's so boring and easy, because the deglaive annihilates almost everything on screen. The music rocks, but it can't save this dull level. You fight Vile at the end, and then it's on to Gateway. This is the boss rush, and I like how the transporters are color-coded to each Maverick, and that this is a separate stage from where you fight the final boss. But it still sucks, because it's just recycled content. At the end, you fight Sigma, but it turns out it was just a new generation Reploid copying him. The final boss is tough in this game, so here's where I recommend you grind for medals to get all the damage reduction upgrades you need. The last level is Sigma's palace on the moon. First you do some platforming, and then you fight Vile for the last time. Here's where the different difficulties matter. On hard mode, Vile traps the character who didn't defeat him in the room, and you need to do the next section solo. This part's pretty fun. The Sigma enemies here are bulky and hit hard, so you need to be careful on how you fight them. Then at the end, you have to navigate around these spikes. I really like using Axel here because of his hover ability. Eventually we make it to the throne room and meet Sigma, who is not looking as great as we expected. I guess all the resurrections have been taking a toll on his body. On hard mode, you start the fight off fighting him solo, but eventually he grabs you in a cutscene and you're saved by the other teammate. Now the fight really begins. Sigma has fast attacks with big hitboxes, so he can be hard to dodge. He's weak to Axel's ray gun and does not like the Icarus Buster parts. It's definitely a tough fight, but I got through it. And with that, Sigma dies for the last time. Yeah, that's it for him. Then we meet Lumine, and things get interesting. He reveals that he was the true mastermind behind this plan. Did anyone else used to think Lumine was a girl? He looks like one, Lumine is a strange name for a guy, and they gave him a female voice actor. The rest of the battle is against Lumine, and you get a new checkpoint here. His first phase is very simple. He flies around the screen and only attacks you with the overdrive attacks from the Maverick bosses, so you should already know how to dodge them. Beating this phase reveals how Lumine and the other new generation Reploids rebelled. Their copy chips contain data from older Reploids, including Sigma. That little bit of Sigma DNA gave these Reploids the choice to go Maverick at will, and they took it. Lumine's plan is to create a new world where the new generation Reploids rule. I want to pause for a second to praise Lumine as a character. I think he has a cool design, looks really creepy in the cutscenes, and the voice actress does a good job at making him menacing. He's definitely one of the coolest characters in the series in my opinion. X and Zero doubt if they can stop Lumine, but Axel shoots him, and they decide to fight. We're now at the last phase, where Lumine becomes a Final Fantasy god monster, and he can definitely give you a game over if you get hit too much or don't have the right upgrades. He has a ton of attacks, but I've played this game quite a bit, so I had a comfortable time dodging them. Shout out to the Hermes foot parts for the invincible dash that helped me avoid some of his weird moves. When his health gets low, he initiates Paradise Lost, where the screen continuously blackens, and if it goes completely dark, you'll instantly lose. At the same time, he armors himself up, so make sure to break through it, and then when he's vulnerable, hit him with the double attack. I've never lost to this part, but it's definitely stressful. This is one of my favorite final battles in the series, particularly the last phase. It's fun, challenging, and a cool way to end the game. With one last shot, Lumine goes down, and we've beaten X8. Lumine warns that the rebellion won't stop with him, and as he lays there dying, he attacks Axel with a tentacle, I guess he has, before X finishes him for good. The ending is slightly different depending on who killed Lumine. X and Zero reflect on what Lumine said, with Zero vowing to continue fighting no matter what. It parallels the endings of X4, where X and Zero also returned to Earth from space, and both feared that they could go Maverick. Now Zero's saying that they'll still fight against the Mavericks, even if most Reploids choose that path. I like that the series ends with X and Zero staying true to their ideology, which continues into the Mega Man Zero series. The most interesting ending is Axel's, where a post-credit scene hints that Lumine lives on inside of him. After the credits, we're told the new generation Reploids kept on being produced even after Lumine's rebellion. So the X series ends on a cliffhanger that 20 years later has not been resolved. Don't you just hate when that happens? Overall, the story in this game is solid compared to the other games in the series. I'm sure there's plot holes I could pick apart, but I enjoyed watching it play out, and everyone was written in character this time. Plus, it was nice to finally have a game without Sigma as the main villain. My biggest complaint about the story is the cliffhanger with Axel is annoying, but I think we can just assume that he fought X and Zero and they saved him. Even if they killed him, he could always come back as long as he hit himself while he tried to repair himself. After you beat the game, New Game Plus is available where you keep your upgrades and rare medals so you can buy more items in the shop. By using cheat codes or fulfilling some specific requirements, you can unlock the ultimate armor for X, the black armor for Zero, a cool looking white armor for Axel, and you can play as the navigators. They're just skins for the three main characters, but I think this is a cool feature. They cost an insane amount in the shop though, and why do even the cheat code characters need to be purchased? Now I'm sure some of you are expecting me to talk about the Mega Man X8 16-bit demake right now, but I already did that months ago, so I'm just going to link the video in the description. Basically the demake fixes almost all of my problems with the original, and it's a fantastic game. I would highly recommend it. So that was Mega Man X8. It's kind of a mixed bag for me. There's so many great ideas here like the customizable armor sets, Axel's gameplay, and the partner mechanic. But the stages suck due to gimmicks that aren't fun, backtracking for upgrades, and grinding so I can buy those upgrades. So all that balances out to a game that's just alright in my opinion. Since we're now done with all the X games, I thought it would be fun to quickly rank them from best to worst. At number 8, we have X7 because the gameplay is boring and awful. Next up at number 7 is X6, where the gameplay is terrible, but at least it's not boring. Number 6 is going to be controversial, but I'm going with X3. I found this game to not be very fun, especially because the early game is so hard. I think if I played the game more, my opinion could improve, so I think X3 is the most potential to rise in the list. At number 5 is X8, for all the reasons I just spent 20 minutes talking about. Number 4 is X5, which is a very flawed game, particularly with the backtracking, but it's still fun to play through, especially with Zero. Number 3 is X2, which is just a great sequel, where most of my issues are small. At number 2, we have the original Mega Man X. This game is a masterpiece, and the only reason it's not higher is because number 1 is Mega Man X4, which is one of my top 5 games of all time. I love this game so much because it nails everything, but above all, it's always a blast to play through. And that's my ranking. Leave your own in the comments. I'd be curious to read them. I put it in this tier list format too because I think some games are closer than others in quality. At long last, we're at the end. We never got a sequel to X8, probably due to declining sales and an oversaturation of Mega Man games on the market. I would like there to be an X9, but honestly the X8 cliffhanger isn't that interesting, and X and Zero stories do continue in the Mega Man Zero series, so I'm okay if we never get that game. Looking back at the X series, you definitely see a big drop in quality after X4, which is a shame. But the later games still have redeeming qualities, and at the very least, they're fascinating to talk about. And if you play the new ROM hacks, they're all much more enjoyable now. It was so much fun discussing the series I love and my relationship with each game. I put so much passion and time into this project, and I really appreciate that people have enjoyed watching it. Sorry I didn't cover the spin-offs, but I might get around to those one day. When I return to Mega Man games, I'll probably review the classic series. As for what's next with this channel, I'm gonna keep it a secret for now. Stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching this retrospective. Sayonara.